Chapter 516. Long Qing had been a handyman in the Jishou Abbey for a long time. Every day, he had to climb up the red mountain that was covered in green vines and deliver things to the oddly shaped old Taoist priests in the cave. He was extremely tired every day and had to bear great mental pressure. This was especially so for the old Taoist priest who had been cut in half. The old Taoist priest treated him like a pig and constantly humiliated and tortured him. He was only satisfied when he was injured and vomited blood. Although he was humiliated and tortured, his life was not threatened. After a few days, Long Qing guessed that although the old Taoist priests in the cave were somewhat abnormal, they knew his background and did not dare to kill him. Therefore, he continued to endure and sometimes even took the initiative to talk to the old Taoist priests. From the experience given to him by the stories in the books, these old Taoist priests who were imprisoned in the cave like ghosts must be extremely lonely. Therefore, as long as he talked more, he might really be able to cultivate some kind of relationship with these old Taoist priests. Once that happened, it would naturally be of great benefit to him. This kind of hope seemed a little childish and cute. So far, apart from asking him about the things that happened in the cultivation world in the recent decades, the Taoist priests were still constantly mocking his low cultivation state and angrily roaring about how he could enter the abbey when he was so weak. But at least he had obtained some information through these conversations, such as the surname of the disabled old Taoist priest who had previously made him vomit blood and fly backward with one of his ribs broken. The old Taoist priest surnamed, he called himself the Halfman Taoist, which was obviously not his real name, but a painful self-mockery after he had been cut in half. According to seniority, he should be the uncle of the current hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. No wonder he had such an unfathomable state. The Halfman Taoist's hands were deep in the fur of the snowfield direwolf. His old Taoist robe was fluttering even though there was no wind. His expression was as cold as a stone, but his eyes revealed endless violent pain and despair. Looking at Long Qing, who stood up with difficulty while wiping his blood, he said faintly, "On the first day you came, I said that you were a piece of trash. What right do you have to talk to me? Get lost." Long Qing did not leave the cave silently like before, because he heard something different from the words of the predecessor from Haoyan Taoism. The man was obviously desperate, and he knew what his despair was. So he walked to the bed covered with wolf skin, knelt down and said, "If I was useless, the Abbey Dean would not have let me come here, nor would he have given me the opportunity to meet you." Hearing the Abbey Dean's name, the Halfman Taoist gradually calmed down. He looked at Long Qing, who was kneeling in front of him, and smiled nervously. He said, "But you're a piece of trash. I'm trash now, but that doesn't mean I'll always be trash." Long Qing replied calmly. He lowered his head slightly, and a faint gray luster flashed across his eyes. "Calling you trash is indeed unfair." The Halfman Taoist looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Being beaten, scolded, and humiliated by me, you still insist on entering the cave every day, which shows that your will is strong enough. Looking at the speed of your injury recovery, it shows that your body has a good foundation. You have been secretly practicing the gray eye, just to find a chance to absorb my power. Whether you want to deceive me or go the way of love, it proves that you are a ruthless person." Hearing these words, Long Qing's body shook. He did not expect that the disabled old Taoist in front of him, who seemed to be crazy, had seen through his thoughts from the beginning. Suddenly, endless fear grew in him, and he wanted to turn around and escape from this magnificent but extremely gloomy cave. However, for some unknown reason, perhaps because he was stiff and unable to move, perhaps because he knew that no matter how fast he escaped, he could not be faster than the old Taoist's eyes, or perhaps he just wanted to take a gamble, he did not move. He was still kneeling in front of the old Taoist, but he lowered his head a little more. The gray eye is indeed an amazing skill. After being modified by the predecessors of Taoism, compared with the original Tao Tai demonic skill, it does not need to devour the flesh and blood of the cultivator, but directly absorbs the opponent's psyche power. It is indeed one of the best choices for sneak attacks and plots. The Halfman Taoist looked up at the top of the cave, as if looking at the sky. He remembered many past events and said slowly, "But in fact, after such modification, it does not look so bloody, so naturally there will be some loss. Compared with Tao Tai, It is difficult to use the psyche power and even spirit suppressed by the gray to integrate with your original world, and it will cause many problems in the future. It is not as powerful as the real Tao Tai. It is a pity that the practice of Tao Tai in the Devil's Doctrine has long been lost. Now that the Devil's Doctrine has withered, presumably no one will know it anymore. This powerful old Taoist, whose cultivation state had almost broken through the 5 states, did not know that Master Lotus had secretly recultivated the practice of Tao Tai. Longqing's expression was slightly cold. He had already seen the relevant records in the Sha hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, but he did not pay much attention to it. Now that he heard what the half-man Taoist said, he knew that it was a very troublesome problem. But now what puzzled him the most was why the half-man Taoist did not kill him or drive him away after seeing through his intentions, but began to teach him like a teacher. The half-man Taoist withdrew his gaze from the top of the cave and looked down at Longqing. He said indifferently, "You have a strong will, a good physical body, ambition, ideas, patience, and ruthlessness. It seems that you have all the conditions to be a successful hero. Then do you know why I still say that you are a waste?" "I do not know. A few days ago, I heard about your experience. I know that you used to have a good time, but in the end, you were destroyed by the disciples of the Academy. Then let me ask you, what is the most inferior to that disciple of the Academy?" Hearing this question, Longqing was silent for a long time. In fact, he had asked himself this question many times. He could not understand how Ning Ke was better than him. He was once the near-perfect West Hill Divine Son, while Ning Ke was just a soldier at the border of the city of Wei. But he had been continuously defeated by his opponent, and the more he lost, the more miserable he became. What was the answer to this question? "You are not thick-skinned enough." The half-man Taoist looked at him and said faintly, or in other words, "You are still trying to preserve your last pride. You do not understand that to become the most powerful cultivator, you must know when to abandon your pride and sink yourself into the swamp of filth." Longqing looked up and frowned in confusion. He asked, "I do not think I have anything to be proud of now." The half-man Taoist raised his hand and pointed at his knees. He said, "Although you kneel in front of me, in your heart you are still standing." Longqing said, "Does Ning Ke not have his pride?" The half-man Taoist said, "I have never seen Ning Ke and do not know what he has done. But I believe that if he must achieve something, he will definitely give up all the pride hidden in his heart. If he was in the Jisho Abbey now, he would definitely not be like you, climbing the mountains silently every day and trying to use emotional attacks or insidious means to steal my power." Longqing was a little confused. He asked, "Then what will he do?" The half-man Taoist laughed hoarsely. The wrinkles on his wrinkled face were like raw noodles that were about to be pulled apart. He said, "On the first day he entered the cave, he would kneel in front of me and beg me to give him half of my power. But, as far as I know, the people in the Academy are very proud. That kind of pride is just a facade. It is pride towards heaven, earth, and people, but they will never be proud of themselves. It is just some cheap pride after becoming strong. Those untrustworthy cheese can betray Hao Yin and join the Devil's Doctrine as long as they can make themselves stronger. There is no pride at all." The half-man Taoist roared angrily. His face was red and his trembling right hand danced wildly in the air. It was as if he wanted to grab an untouchable enemy and tear him into countless pieces. Everything in the cave seemed to feel this anger. The snow-white wolf's fur became smoother and smoother. The luminous pearls on the cave walls quietly dimmed. Longqing knelt in front of the half-man Taoist. He felt as if he was about to be burned by this powerful mental power. He used all the strength in his body to prevent his trembling body from collapsing to the ground. The wind suddenly stopped, and the cave returned to a dead silence. The half-man Taoist looked at Longqing and asked slowly, "Do you know who cut me in half at the waist?" His voice was very calm and seemed to be emotionless, but it was faintly filled with endless pain. Longqing's hands were still trembling slightly. His fingertips were slightly bent and almost scratched. He risked the old Taoist's anger and said in a trembling voice, "It was either the headmaster of the Academy or Ku Howren." The half-man Taoist was slightly startled and asked, "How do you know?" Longqing said, "Senior, Your cultivation should have exceeded the 5 states and had already transcended the mortal realm. In the world, there are only 2 people who can defeat you and injure you so badly." Hearing his answer, the half-man Taoist laughed with endless hatred and said, "You are right. Back then, I was cut in half by Koharan. And the old guys hiding in this mountain cave were either injured by Koharan or the headmaster of the academy. Back then, I was seriously injured in the battle with Koharan. If I didn't have a secret method to save my life, I would have suffered endless pain and died on the spot. But even though I survived now, I can't forget the pain back then. I can't forget the feeling of watching my intestines flow out with my own eyes. I can't forget the feeling of watching my lower body leave with my own eyes. I can't forget the pain. Although Koharan is already dead, I still can't forget the pain. I can't accept it. I want Koharan to die in pain. So I always want to destroy the academy. However, for the rest of my life, I can only rely on my abnormal upper body to crawl around in this cave like a worm. I'm just a useless person without a butt. How can I destroy the academy?" The half-man Taoist looked at Long Qing, who was kneeling in front of him, and laughed like a madman. He said hopelessly, "The Abbey Dean sent you to me. I thought you had a chance, but I didn't expect you to still be a useless person. Although you have a butt, you are not as good as me without a butt." Long Qing suddenly raised his head and asked, "How can I not become a useless person?" The old Taoist stopped laughing and stared at his eyes. He said faintly, "The so-called strong are those who can pursue power at all costs." Long Qing knelt on the ground and said with a slightly trembling voice, "I chose to cultivate the gray eyes because I wanted to plot against you, or any predecessor of Haotian Taoism in this mountain cave. I thought it was already at all costs. I don't know how to go further." The old Taoist said with a strange smile, "Since you want to do it at all costs, then you should not have any other emotions or positions except for power. Be it pride or belief, you should throw them all away. If one's but determines one's position, you should be like me now, without a but at all." Long Qing asked in a low voice, "What about Haotian?" The old Taoist said sternly, "The reason why those be asterisk cheese in the academy are so powerful is that they have no belief and no rules. In their eyes, Haotian is not a butt but a fart. So if you want to defeat the academy, you have to have no belief and no rules. You have to learn to treat Haotian as a fart. Let it go." I laughed wildly for 3 times. I finally wrote it. "Thank you for your photos. Thank you for the encouragement from the big girl. Thank you for my father's eyes. Thank you for your monthly votes. If you still have votes, please continue. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 517. In the wilderness, Long Qing's cultivation had been destroyed by Ning Kei's arrow. He had lost all hope and even tried to give up his faith and walk into the deep night. However, he did not die in the end and did not truly throw himself into the arms of Yama. It was also that desperate experience that made him understand that simple words or actions were not true betrayals. As a firm believer of Haotian, it could be said that it was the most difficult thing in the world to erase his fear and faith towards Haotian from the bottom of his heart. It was like trying to disperse the light from the sky. Long Qing knelt in front of the half-man Taoist and said, "The will of Haotian is too strong. It has long surpassed my will. I have no idea how to erase it." The half-man Taoist asked, "What is the will of Haotian?" Long Qing thought of the conversation between him and the Abbey Dean on the boat in the South Sea and said, "Haotian is omnipresent and omniscient. Everything in the world is under the control of Haotian. Therefore, our thoughts are the will of Haotian." The half-man Taoist did not expect him to have such a deep understanding of the will of Haotian. He nodded with slight admiration and said, "The thoughts are the subjective manifestation of the will of Haotian. However, there must be 2 sides to everything. The will of Haotian also has its objective side. Have you ever felt it?" Long Qing was slightly confused. He thought that the will of Haotian in the objective category was the body of the divine law of Haotian. How could a mortal in the world perceive it? Haotian has no size, but it has infinite size. When it is big, it is like countless oceans. When it is small, it is like thousands of pieces of gravel. Hao Yin has no shape, but it has countless shapes. Sometimes it is a beast, sometimes it is a human, sometimes it is a tree, sometimes it is a mountain, sometimes it is the sea, sometimes it is the sun, and sometimes it is the world. The half-man Taoist's eyes were slightly drooping. His face, which was like a dead tree, seemed to be plated with a layer of holy light. His voice was emotionless, as if these descriptions of Hao Yin did not come from his mouth, but originally existed in this world and appeared in the cave through his voice. There is no description of Hao Yin in the West Hill scriptures, because in the teachings, any attempt to describe Hao Yin's behavior was extremely disrespectful and blasphemous. This was the first time Long Qing had heard someone describe Hao Yin. Although the description seemed simple, it made his Taoist heart tremble violently. What made his Taoist heart tremble was not only because he had heard the image of Hao Yin's divine law, but also because he had finally confirmed a fact. The crippled old Taoist on the bed, who only had half of his body left, had indeed broken through the 5 states. This was because only cultivators who had broken through the 5 states and entered the Tianqi state could be lucky enough to see Hao Yin's divine law with their own eyes. Only these people were allowed to describe Hao Yin's appearance. However, a Hao Yin Taoism predecessor in the Tianqi state was cut in half by a sword. Long Qing could not help but feel that the headmaster of the academy and Ku Haoran were extremely terrifying. The half-man Taoist seemed to know what Long Qing was thinking at this time. He slowly opened his eyes and said, "No matter what form Hao Yin appears in the world, it must be grand, solemn, and self-evidently great. We cannot be great, we can only be strong." The reason why the powerful and lowly non-believers in the academy could completely erase the will of Hao Yin was because they had never truly believed in Hao Yin from the beginning. It is difficult for Hao Yin Taoism disciples to do this, so I will tell you the true description of Hao Yin now. Long Qing's voice trembled slightly as he asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because since you cannot erase the will of Hao Yin, you can only try to forget. You did not even know what Hao Yin was before, so how could you forget?" The half-man Taoist looked at him and said, "Only by knowing can you forget." Long Qing was deep in thought. He lowered his head and fell into a long silence. After a long time, the luminous pearls on the stone walls of the cave lit up again. The white wool fur on the soft bed swayed in the wind. He finally raised his head, his expression calm. The half-man Taoist asked with a hint of anxiety, "Have you ever forgotten?" Long Qing asked, "What have I forgotten?" "Ha ha." The half-man Taoist laughed. He excitedly stretched out his hand and wanted to pat his thigh to vent the pain, despair, and suffering of waiting for so many years. The old Taoist only remembered the fact that he had not forgotten for many years after he slapped his palm heavily into the wolf fur. He had long lost his legs, and he also had no buttocks. He was now just a poor deformed old Taoist with only half a body left. So he cried out in pain. The ghost-like mournful cries kept ringing in the quiet cave. Long Qing calmly looked at the old Taoist beating his chest and wrists like a madman, and even occasionally strangling his own throat until his face turned red. It was not until the unpleasant sounds of crying and laughing gradually stopped that he said, "My natal item is a peach blossom." There was a peach blossom on the chest of his Taoist robe, a black peach blossom. The old Taoist narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at him, asking hoarsely, "Why is it a peach blossom?" Long Qing calmly said, "After I entered the no-doubt state, I had never decided on a natal item. Later, when I was studying in the Revelation Institute, I heard the story of the headmaster of the academy going to West Hill to cut down peach blossoms. From then on, I vowed to let peach blossoms bloom all over the world, so peach blossoms became my natal item." Listening to these words, the old Taoist looked at him more and more strangely. Long Qing's expression became calmer and calmer. He smiled and said, "At the beginning of cultivation, my dream was to lead Hao Yin Taoism to defeat the academy. These years, with so many things happening, especially the appearance of Ning Ke, my idea became more direct and firm. I will devote all my life to the great cause of destroying the academy and the Tang Empire." The old Taoist looked into his eyes and saw many things. He said, "Very good. As soon as he finished speaking, the old Taoist heavily hit Long Qing's left chest with his palm. A powerful force gushed out from the palm and instantly penetrated his muscles and ribs, stabbing straight into his heart. Long Qing's face suddenly turned pale, and his eyebrows were raised like swords. He seemed to be in extreme pain, but he did not think of avoiding from the beginning. At this time, he did not try to escape from this skinny and horrifying palm, because he knew that the state difference between him and the old Taoist was like heaven and earth. No matter how he tried to escape, it would be futile, and he firmly believed that the old Taoist had previously described Hao Ian to make him forget Hao Ian, not to kill him with one palm. The half-man Taoist's skinny palm was like a vertical blue lake that had shrunk many times. There was a very quiet aura condensed on the palm. It was as viscous as the lake water, but it gave people a sense of cleanliness. It was impossible to tear it apart, and one did not want to tear it apart. Your eyes are too black and white. The half-man Taoist stared into Long Qing's eyes and said. The expression on his skinny face did not show whether he was crying or laughing. Long Qing's body trembled slightly. From the old Taoist's words, he confirmed that he had made the right bet. His expectations were about to become reality. He looked into the old Taoist's eyes, filled with gratitude and shock. In the blink of an eye, his black and white pupils began to undergo an extremely strange change. The boundary between his black pupils and white pupils began to blur. His black pupils grew fainter and fainter, while his white pupils grew darker and darker. They grew closer and closer to each other until they became a completely uniform gray. As Long Qing's eyes turned gray, a strong attraction penetrated his ocean of qi and tightly sucked the half-man Taoist's skinny palm to his left chest. The half-man Taoist had expected this, and there was no change in his expression. In a moment, the lake in the skinny palm became a vast ocean and ferociously poured into Long Qing's body. Long Qing trembled violently, and blood began to ooze from the corner of his mouth. Invisible wounds appeared in his internal organs, and his eyes were also bloodshot. However, in the mix of black and white, they were gradually washed into a monotonous and palpitating gray. He slowly closed his eyes. A Tianqi strongman who had surpassed the 5 states, even if he was seriously injured, and even if he only had half of his psyche power, was still not a gift that Long Qing could easily accept. At this moment, Long Qing felt that his body was like a leather bag filled with alcohol, about to explode in the next moment. He felt that his chest was already bulging like a mountain, about to burst in the next moment. He felt that his internal organs had long been destroyed into minced meat by the powerful aura. Fortunately, he forcibly maintained a trace of clarity in his Taoist heart. He woke up at the moment before the disillusionment came. He remembered that the perception, consciousness, experience, knowledge, and psyche power that he had endured at this moment were all intangible and intangible. All of this was an illusion, and there was no change in his body. He knew that he had to endure this pain in order to obtain a new life, a stronger new life. The wrinkles on the old Taoist face seemed to have deepened, but also seemed to have lightened. Only half of his body was left. He leaned forward slightly on the edge of the bed, and his face was very close to Long Qing's. Looking at Long Qing's closed eyes and struggling to support himself, he smiled and said in a trembling voice, "Absorb more, absorb more." His laughter was very unpleasant, and his smile was very strange. It was full of love and greed, and it felt extremely abnormal. It was like an old demon in a mountain village at night, feeding its big-headed son. At this moment, dozens of extremely powerful auras penetrated the hard stone walls and quietly came to this cave. Each powerful aura represented a strongman of Hao-Ian Taoism in a cave on this mountain peak. These strongmen of Hao-Ian Taoism did not interfere with this strange transfer of power. Instead, they quietly watched. It could be sensed that these auras were very calm, but there were extremely complicated emotions hidden in them. Long Qing was unaware of this. His pale face appeared very strange and excited scarlet, and his throat kept moving up and down, and there came the sound of da-da. He was like a newborn cub, closing his eyes and frowning, desperately sucking all the milk that he could suck, extremely satisfied and intoxicated. The old Taoist looked at Long Qing, and there was also a satisfied and intoxicated smile on his face. Perhaps he was too excited, or for some other reason. The waist cavity that was cut by the sword years ago began to ooze out, wetting the snow-white fur mattress. Absorb more. Don't worry. Suddenly, the smile on the old Taoist's face disappeared instantly. He stared at Long Qing and said with a voice as cold as steel, "You can only take what I give you. If I don't give it to you, you can't take it." Long Qing still closed his eyes, as if he could not hear what he said. He really looked like a starving cub. I wish everyone a happy mid-autumn festival. I wish everyone's health and happiness. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 518. Receiving no response, the half-man Taoist's eyes were filled with endless shock and incredulity. He scolded sternly, "How dare you?" Long Qing still did not respond. A newborn beast's individual strength was naturally extremely weak. However, its desire for lust and the vitality it released was precisely at its most powerful and boundless moment. Long Qing was the cub. He closed his eyes and sucked in everything he could, calmly, greedily, hungrily, and innocently. The black peach blossom in his lapel became darker and darker. His chest seemed to become a bottomless abyss, sucking air from the old Taoist's palm. The old Taoist's face suddenly became even more haggard, and his body became thinner and smaller, even faintly looking like a hunchback. He had placed all his hopes on Long Qing, who was kneeling in front of him, and was even willing to pour half of his cultivation into Long Qing's body. However, at this moment, he found that something was wrong, and he even faintly felt great fear. He was the half-man Taoist. Even if he lost half of his cultivation, he could still survive. However, with Long Qing's greedy and terrifying appearance, how could he give up? If this situation continued, even if he was a powerhouse in the Tianqi state who had surpassed the 5 states, he would not be able to hold on for long. He would die. Living like a rat in a dark cave after being cut in half at the waist was a terrible mental torture. But it was still living. In the shadow of death, no one would really believe that it was better to be dead than alive. It was the same for the half-man Taoist. After being cut in half by Kuhaoran's sword, he had survived with great difficulty. Decades later, he naturally would not be willing to die like this. "You're too greedy." The half-man Taoist felt the psyche power surging out of his body like a tide. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable anger. A strong aura was released from his body. The scrawny palm that had fallen on Long Qing's left chest like a blue lake suddenly became a mountain, pressing forward. There were several crisp, cracking sounds. 5 ribs on Long Qing's left chest broke. He spat out a mouthful of blood, wetting the black peach blossom on his chest. Then he woke up. Long Qing slowly raised his head and looked at the old Taoist who was close at hand. He said indifferently, "Since it has already begun, why should it end like this? Since you have already absorbed so much, why don't you absorb more?" The half-man Taoist knew that he had already awoken from his almost instinctive state of madness. He did not expect him to speak in such a manner, and could not help but become angrier. However, before his anger could turn into violent flames, it was already replaced by fear and confusion. Earlier, his palm had fallen like a mountain and broken several of Long Qing's ribs, but it did not leave Long Qing's chest. Instead, it was stained with blood and sank deep into Long Qing's chest. There was a hole in Long Qing's chest. The half-man Taoist's palm reached into the hole through the Taoist robe and sank halfway into his forearm. There was a black peach blossom stained with blood. The half-man Taoist wanted to pull his hand out, but he could not. He could clearly feel that his palm and half of his forearm had come into contact with the slippery and sticky internal organs. The faintly wriggling flesh and blood seemed to be coming to life, making him feel extremely disgusted and cold. The hole in Long Qing's body was like a quagmire. The quagmire was filled with mud that was countless feet deep. The mud was extremely sticky, and at the bottom of the quagmire was a dark and endless abyss. The half-man Taoist felt that he was struggling in this quagmire. Countless poisonous miasma continuously seeped into his pores, and the cold and filthy black mud was gradually covering his facial features. After a moment, his body was about to be swallowed by this black quagmire. Although his light and intangible soul could pass through the mud, it would eventually enter the endless abyss and endure hundreds of millions of years of loneliness. That was death. The half-man Taoist became more and more stooped. It was obvious to the naked eye that his body had shrunk. He could not help but tremble violently. He looked at Long Qing, his eyes filled with fear, anger, and confusion. He did not know what had happened and why he could not stop this trash in front of him from taking everything from him. Then he saw Long Qing's eyes. It was a very calm pair of eyes. There was no greed or thirst, not even any emotion. It was like the branches of trees swaying gently in the wind, or the lake water rippling gently in the wind. Because it was natural, it was calm, and it was this calmness that made people easily feel fear. This pair of eyes was no longer black and white, but it was also not as perfectly balanced and perfect gray as before. The black pupils were still darker in color, becoming darker and smaller. Mixed with calm emotions, it looked like a demon from the underworld peeking out from the abyss, quietly watching the world. At this moment, the half-man Taoist suddenly thought of what he had previously described to Long Qing about the true face of Hao Yin he had seen during the Tianqi. He vaguely understood something, and suddenly felt infinite fear. After Long Qing had used the gray eye to absorb too much of his aura, the old Taoist body had shrunk. His face was the same, but the distance between his eyes was much wider. He looked like a mentally disabled person who was in a daze under a tree. He looked at Long Qing's emotionless, calm, and terrifying eyes and murmured with a trembling voice, "Why is this happening? How could Hao Yin allow you to go beyond the limit?" Long Qing looked at him calmly and said, "You said that to erase Hao Yin's will, one needs no faith, no rules, so how can there be a limit? But in fact, you are still wrong. No one in this world can really ignore the rules because the rules belong to Hao Yin's divine realm. That was why Kahaoren was killed by the heavens. So to really ignore the rules, one should not erase Hao Yin's will, but use one's own mind to understand Hao Yin's will, or even completely transform into Hao Yin's will." The half-man Taoist body kept trembling, and blood kept gushing out from his waist. His voice was shrill and terrified as he roared, "Even so, how could Hao Yin choose a useless person like you? How can mortals like us guess Hao Yin's will?" Long Qing looked at him and said emotionlessly, "We only need to accept and praise it. Just a moment ago, I wanted more of you, even all of you. And Hao Yin felt my wish, so you must give all of yourself to me." The half-man Taoist said mournfully, "I don't want to." Long Qing said, "You can't stop me because I have received Hao Yin's decree. But I will die." The half-man Taoist roared, cried, and begged. Long Qing said, "For decades, your life has been worse than death. Today, you can die in my hands, and you can be free. Give yourself to me before you die, and you will die a worthy death." The half-man Taoist's body had shrunk a lot, and he looked like a child a few years old. But this was not rejuvenation, and the wrinkles on his face were deeper than before. He knew that he was going to die soon. He knew that he could not escape from this swamp. He even vaguely guessed that this was really Hao Yin's decree. But he was still unwilling to die. He screamed in pain and stretched out his moving hand, wanted to tear Long Qing's mouth and dig out his eyes. But strangely, his hand on Long Qing's chest was still the same, and his moving hand had shrunk a lot. It could not reach Long Qing at all, and could only tremble and wave in the air in vain. He looked like a child whose candy had been taken away, extremely miserable and desperate. This is really Hao Yin's decree. Long Qing looked at him and comforted him. Otherwise, why would you be so stupid to be willing to pass half of your power to me, knowing that I am a cruel and cold person, knowing that I want to plot against you and take all your power, so you can die in peace? The half-man Taoist's arm, which was waving in the air, became stiff. After a moment, he retracted his hand tiredly. He lowered his head in pain and panted heavily. He said, "Yes, I know, you're a bad fellow. Why did I give you a chance to plot against me? Perhaps. I really don't want to live anymore. I just want to find an heir to help me fulfill my wish." He raised his head. His head had shrunk a lot, and his eyes were much bigger, and they were about to move to the cheeks on both sides of his face. He looked particularly strange and terrifying. But at this time, the expression in his eyes was no longer resentful, angry, or fearful. There was only a bright light left, which was the relief after understanding. He looked at Long Qing and panted excitedly. He said, "Kill everyone in the academy for me, and then let the billions of Haotian believers in the world remember my name. My surname is He, and my name is I will kill everyone in the academy, and I will destroy the Tang Empire. Without waiting for him to finish, Longqing said calmly, "But who you are has little to do with me. You have given me too much humiliation and pain these days, so this is your punishment." The half-man Taoist was slightly startled, and then he laughed out loud. However, his cultivation base was about to dissipate, and his laughter sounded particularly hoarse and powerless. "You are indeed a ruthless and heartless fellow. Forget it. No matter where you go in the future, it is still my cultivation base that will allow you to be reborn. Whether my name is left behind or not, when you roam the world, you will spread my glory." Longqing smiled and said, "Exactly." The half-man Taoist did not speak anymore and calmly waited for death. But the next moment, he suddenly narrowed his horrifying, deformed eyes and looked at Longqing. He said, "Death is coming soon. I don't know if I'll fall into the underworld or return to the divine light of Haotian. But I want to tell you that I am still afraid of death, because the end is every life's irrepressible sorrow." Longqing listened quietly, knowing that the old Taoist's last words must have a deep meaning. "I will be afraid of death. They are the same as me." The half-man Taoist said. Longqing knew that he was referring to the other old Taoist priests in the mountain cave. The half-man Taoist raised his head with difficulty and looked at everything in the deep cave. He looked at the dozens of strong breaths and said mockingly, "They are watching you suck me dry, and they are feeling my fear of death. So they will definitely not be like me and pass on all their cultivation to you. But just as I cannot resist the temptation of you, they cannot resist the temptation of you. So if they want to live, they cannot allow you to continue living. Unless you leave, they will definitely kill you." Longqing said after a moment of silence, "Although it is a little regretful, I understand." The half-man Taoist looked at him quietly and said lovingly, "Then run." After saying this, he closed his eyes and fell on the snow-white bed. He died. The dozens of strong breaths in the cave suddenly surged and seemed extremely terrifying. In an instant, they crushed all the luminous pearls on the stone wall and attacked Longqing's body. Longqing screamed, and his face became snow-white. His knees bounced off the ground, and his body was like a leaf. He passed through the only passage among the dozens of breaths and floated out of the cave. He escaped the cave. Without thinking, he directly jumped off the cliff and ran towards the Jisho Abbey in the distance. The dozens of strong breaths, with fear of the unknown, with violent breaths, with angry flames, and with unimaginably powerful states, spewed out from the countless holes in the cliff. The green vines covering the surface of the mountain suddenly shattered and shot towards the sky and the earth like sharp arrows. The earth trembled uneasily, and the whole world seemed to be destroyed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 519. The vines on the cliff were very strong, but they seemed so fragile under the tearing of the dozens of terrifying auras. They broke into countless pieces and shot toward the dense forest. The vines were very strong, but did not mean that they were heavy. In fact, they were very light. But when they were on the mountain path and in the forest, they were like heavy siege stones. Accompanied by a loud rumbling sound, the green vines smashed into the ground, creating countless holes. They flew into the forest, smashing countless trees and splashing countless debris. The debris whistled through the air, some deeply embedded into solid tree trunks, and some left deep white marks on the surface of hard rocks. It was an extremely terrifying scene. A piece of vine that looked very thin and soft fell from the cliff and hit Longqing in the back. He felt that his back had been hit by a huge stone. His face suddenly turned pale, and he spat out a large mouthful of blood. His eyes showed extreme fear, but he forced himself to endure the injury and continued to run down the mountain. The old Taoist priests in the cave had mixed feelings about Longqing. He represented the hope of the world, but he also represented the shadow of death. When the two were mixed together, it became the darkest and sweetest temptation. They had silently watched the half-man Taoist pass on his power and vaguely understood something. They understood that even if Long Qing was not as vicious as before, he could not control the irrepressible ambition and greed in the process of using the gray eye. And that absolutely cold ambition and greed would ultimately represent their death. The Taoist priests who had been injured by the headmaster and Kohaoren had lingered on this mountain for decades and still did not die. This meant that they did not want to die. If they did not want to die, they had to be able to resist the dark and sweet temptation that Long Qing brought to them. The simplest way was to kill him. Long Qing did not understand this from the beginning. But before the half-man Taoist died, he had warned him, so he reacted immediately and tried to escape. However, even though he knew how terrifying the old Taoist priests in the cave were, he still did not expect that just a few simple breaths could cause such an earth-shattering power. Rocks flew on the mountain path and rumbled continuously. In the dense forest, trees fell and branches were destroyed, creating countless smoke and dust. It looked like Hao Qian was angry and had sent a meteor shower to punish disrespectful sinners. With a pale face, Long Qing ran wildly in the smoke and dangerous explosions, desperately avoiding the green vines and fallen trees that could easily kill him. Fortunately for him, he had to climb this cliff every day since he left the South Sea and came to the Jishou Abbey to deliver things to the old Taoist priests in the cave. Therefore, he was very familiar with the terrain of the cliff and the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. This familiarity helped him make the fastest and most accurate response. From time to time, debris cut his skin and flesh. More and more wounds appeared on his body, and more blood flowed out. His black Taoist robe did not change color, but the edges of his robe were already wet and began to drip. Gradually, the explosions in the dense forest became more and more sparse, and there were fewer and fewer pieces of green vines falling down. He was getting further and further away from the mountain peak. He did not slow down his running speed, and the expression on his face became calmer and calmer. In the deepest part of his calm expression, perhaps there was still fear and ecstasy, but no one could see it, even if it was himself. Long Qing finally succeeded in leaving the cliff and running into the Jishou Abbey. He came to the lake and looked at the golden and jade-like grass on the eaves of the 7 thatch huts. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly let out a low roar like a wounded beast. He rushed into the 3rd hut and reached out to hold the Sha hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. The Sha hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane recorded countless secret skills. It was as vast as the sea and extremely thick. However, for some reason, when his blood-stained right hand fell on the Sha hand scroll, the Tomes of Arcane seemed to become much thinner. Long Qing put the Sha hand scroll in his arms, walked out of the hut, and looked at the other huts. However, just as he was about to continue doing something, he suddenly felt a very faint aura coming towards the lake at an extremely fast speed. His expression suddenly froze, and he did not dare to delay any longer. He ran towards the Taoist temple in the distance. That Taoist temple was the medicine hall of the Jishou Abbey. These days, Long Qing had been refining medicine and cultivating in the medicine hall, so he was very familiar with the place. He ran directly to the alchemy room at the back of the medicine hall and took out the earth-sitting elixir that had been simmering in the tripod. Although he had forcibly absorbed the half-man Taoist cultivation, one could imagine how majestic the experience, consciousness, and psyche power of a powerhouse in the Tianqi state who had surpassed the 5 states was. With his current state, there was no way for him to absorb it in a short period of time. He even had to use an extremely strong willpower to suppress the restlessness of the cultivation in his body. And when he escaped from the cave, he had been seriously injured. Logically speaking, he should not hesitate to swallow the earth-sitting elixir that he had painstakingly refined, and then sit on the ground to circulate the medicinal power to ensure his survival. However, the strange thing was that he did not even look at the elixirs. Instead, he ran directly to the front hall. He pushed open the sandalwood door and walked to the simple display shelf. On the display shelf, there was a small crystal clear medicine bottle made of unknown materials. In order to resist the temptation, he did not open the sandalwood door these days. He did not even look behind the door. However, in his heart, He did not know how many times he had imagined holding this small medicine bottle. He did not know how many times he had imagined how it would feel to hold this small medicine bottle in his arms. So he remembered the position of the small medicine bottle very clearly. He did not hesitate when he reached out, and his movements were very accurate. He was almost emotionless, and his state of mind was so dark and terrifying that even the old Taoist priests in the cave were faintly afraid of him. The moment his fingers touched the small medicine bottle, he could not help but tremble. His fingers were stained with blood, and there was an extremely strong smell of blood. The small medicine bottle gave off a faint medicinal fragrance. When this extremely faint medicinal fragrance lingered on his fingers, all the smell of blood seemed to be instantly purified and could no longer be smelled. Long Qing even felt that the serious injuries in his body seemed to disappear in an instant. He could no longer maintain his calm, and his gray eyes suddenly brightened. When Long Qing walked out of the medicine hall and prepared to use the fastest speed to find a way to leave the Jishou Abbey, he was surprised to see the figure of the middle-aged Taoist in front of the meadow. The meadow in early autumn strangely did not turn yellow, nor was there any frost. It was still green. The middle-aged Taoist was wearing a light green Taoist robe. He stood in front of the meadow as if he wanted to blend in, and looked extremely inconspicuous. This scene meant some other information to Long Qing. He had never known what level of cultivation this Uncle Master had reached. At this moment, looking at him faintly blending in with the meadow, he finally confirmed that this Uncle Master had long entered the knowing destiny state, and might even have reached the peak of the knowing destiny state. A bitter smile appeared on Long Qing's face. No matter how lonely the Jishou Abbey was, it was still the holy land of Haotian Taoism. It was still the unknown place that was respected by the cultivators in the world. How could a Taoist who was qualified to manage this Taoist abbey be an ordinary person? The middle-aged Taoist looked at him quietly and said, "Why did you do this?" Long Qing knew what he was asking and answered, "Because I wanted to do this." On the boat in the South Sea, the Taoist and Indigo had a very important conversation with Long Qing. It was from that moment that Long Qing understood that his thoughts were the will of Haotian. The middle-aged Taoist had been meditating in the Jishou Abbey all year round, and he was the senior brother of the Taoist in Indigo on the boat in the South Sea. Naturally, he understood the meaning of Long Qing's answer. He looked at Long Qing and said, "As a junior brother, I may not necessarily agree with senior brother's view, but I can't find a reason to oppose him. However, even if our thoughts are the will of Haotian, I still don't understand why you're doing this. You can cultivate in the Jishou Abbey, read the tomes of arcane, and spend time with the seniors of Haotian Taoism. Even if you do nothing and cultivate peacefully, one day you will regain your original strength and even achieve a better state. Why do you want to take such a risk?" "Because I'm not the only one cultivating in the world," Long Qing answered. He did not finish his sentence. He was very clear that when he was meditating in the Jishou Abbey, those people did not stop moving forward. The Tao addict had become the great divine priest of judgment. The calligraphy addict had entered the knowing destiny state, and the most important thing was that the person named Ning Ke would not wait for him. He needed time. He could not cultivate peacefully in this Taoist abbey for decades, because although his expression and mood seemed to be calm, he could not achieve true peace. Before defeating the Tao addict and killing Ning Quebec, the middle-aged Taoist suddenly smelled a very faint medicinal fragrance, and his expression gradually became serious. He said, "Murdering the seniors of Haotian Taoism is already a great sin, and you actually want to steal the treasure of Haotian Taoism?" Long Qing knew that Uncle had already found out that he had stolen the small medicine bottle. When he was about to say something, the middle-aged Taoist suddenly felt the aura of the tomes of arcane on him. He could not help but change his expression and sternly reprimanded, "How dare you steal the tomes of arcane? Aren't you afraid of being thrown into the underworld?" I have been thinking, when I was really desperate, no longer giving up on myself, no longer swaying between light and darkness, and began to be an ordinary businessman, try to live a vulgar and boring life like a mortal. Why did the Abbey Dean come to save me? When I came to the Jisho Abbey and began to cultivate the gray eye, I saw the heavenly power pill and gradually could not suppress the temptation of the aura of the seniors of Haotian Taoism in the cave. Especially when the Halfman Taoist told me about the relationship between power and pride before he died. I gradually understood that if the Abbey Dean could find something special about me, it would be that I have no attachment to this world. So I can be proud of everything in this world, and I can also be proud of nothing. I can abandon everything. And so, I have the best chance to become the most powerful person. Longqing looked at the middle-aged Taoist and said quietly. There was a very strange but extraordinarily firm smile on his pale face. As long as I can become powerful again, so what if I have to sink in the underworld forever? If I am willing to pay the price of sinking in the underworld forever, why can't I become powerful again? Wow. The feeling of updating is so good. There's more today. Take your time to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 520. The middle-aged Taoist frowned slightly. He knew very well why his senior brother had sent Longqing back to the Jisho Abbey. Longqing was not wrong, but he knew that even his senior brother would not have thought that Longqing would be so bold and vicious. He would not have thought that Longqing would dare to do so many treacherous things. If this is a path that my senior brother has drawn for you, then you have now gone straight to the end of this path and come to the cliff. If this is the life that my senior brother has arranged for you, then you have now deviated from his arrangements and exceeded the limits that everyone can tolerate. The middle-aged Taoist said slowly. The green meadow behind him reflected the sunlight. Behind the meadow was a steep precipice. No one knew how deep the precipice was or how deep the abyss under the clouds was. In the cave, when I was absorbing the consciousness of the Halfman Taoist, I was very intoxicated. That intoxication was mixed with fear. Just as I said, there are no rules or limits that can restrain me. The Abbey Dean's arrangements may not be correct, because as long as there are arrangements, there will be certain rules. Longqing looked at the light green Taoist robe on the middle-aged Taoist and thought of the green Taoist robe on the South Sea boat that the Abbey Dean wore. A trace of fear appeared on his face. However, after a moment, the fear turned into relief. The Abbey Dean probably cannot imagine what will happen to me, because other than ourselves, even we do not know our own thoughts. How can we understand what Haotian's will is? The middle-aged Taoist sighed and said, even my senior brother and the great divine priest of revelation do not dare to assume that they understand Haotian's will. Who in this world can truly understand what firmament is thinking? Why do you have to say that you bear Haotian's orders and blame your sins on Haotian? Longqing said, the sins in the eyes of mortals may not exist in the mind of Haotian. Maybe you're right. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said, but now that I'm standing in front of you, I really want to know what belief supports you not to kneel down and beg for mercy out of fear. Instead, you talk to me with confidence. Do you really think that I will let you leave with the tomes of arcane and the sacred medicine with such words? Longqing said calmly, if my thoughts are really Haotian's will, then I will fulfill Haotian's orders. How can Haotian let me die? If I die in your hands today, it proves that my thoughts are not Haotian's will. In that case, I will lose my last hope, and there is no point in continuing to live. So, Uncle, I am really not afraid of death, at least not now. The middle-aged Taoist said, you still have a point, but to me, words are as meaningless as to you. Hand over the heavenly book and the sacred medicine, and at least I won't kill you now. Of course you won't kill me, because at least the Abbey Dean once placed some hope on me. Longqing glanced at his Taoist robe and felt the tomes of arcane and the small bottle in his arms. He said, there are no rules and no bottom line, so there's no deal. I have lost a lot in the past, so I am as greedy as a child now. How can I bear to hand over the candy that I have in my hands? Then he raised his head, looked at the middle-aged Taoist, and said, Uncle, have you ever seen those poor children fighting for candy? I didn't have the chance to see it when I was in the Imperial Palace or in the West Hill Divine Palace. But I saw it when I was a beggar. It was more lively and sad than beggars fighting for leftovers. Even if the children were full, even if the sweets were so cheap, even if the sweets were useless to them, they still had to eat desperately, because if they didn't eat, they might be eaten by other children. The middle-aged Taoist was shocked and hurriedly said, "No." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves. A vast and pure aura suddenly rolled up countless amounts of chi of heaven and earth, turning into invisible ropes that were about to bind Longqing's body. However, Longqing already had a plan in mind. As he spoke, he had already silently crushed the small bottle in his arms. Before the middle-aged Taoist's aura could reach him, he stuffed the broken pieces of the bottle into his mouth. With a strained smile, he chewed hard. He really looked like a poor child who was desperately stuffing candy into his mouth. The broken pieces of the small bottle were very sharp. They cut open Longqing's mouth, and some blood flowed down from the corner of his lips. More blood, mixed with the heavenly power pill and the broken pieces, entered his stomach. The middle-aged Taoist moved like a willow in the wind and came before Longqing in an instant. However, Longqing had already taken the medicine. Even if he cut open his stomach, the heavenly power pill would not be able to regenerate. The middle-aged Taoist's expression was unusually cold. The anger in his eyes seemed to be about to spit out and burn Longqing to ashes. The heavenly power pill could be said to be the most precious medicine in the world. Even the Jisho Abbey only had a few of them. After Chen Pippi left the Jisho Abbey, there was only one left. Longqing raised his pale face and looked at the middle-aged Taoist with a smile. He said, "Uncle, I've eaten the only heavenly power pill. If you kill me like this, at least this heavenly power pill will be like a candy dropped into a cesspool. If you let me live, you can at least look forward to the changes this heavenly power pill will bring to me. I think for Haotian Taoism, this is the right choice." The middle-aged Taoist narrowed his eyes. No one could tell what he was thinking. Stealing the medicine of Haotian Taoism was, of course, an unforgivable crime. However, from another perspective, once the medicine was taken, its preciousness would be transferred to the person who took it. No matter how angry he was, the medicine would no longer exist. Now, only the person who took the medicine was left. This was like the person who had the jade was guilty. However, if the jade merged with the person would become the jade. Not only would he not be guilty, but he would also be precious. From the moment he saw the middle-aged Taoist, Longqing did not think that he could escape from the Jisho Abbey with his own strength. Not to mention that he was heavily injured. Even if he digested the terrifying cultivation of the half-man Taoist that he had swallowed, he would not be able to defeat this unfathomable uncle. From that moment on, he had decided on this strategy. Whether it was the words that were filled with resentment or the words about the will of Haotian, they were all a cover. What he wanted to do was to take the heavenly power pill when the middle-aged Taoist was not paying attention. Longqing had succeeded. He looked at the middle-aged Taoist, who seemed to be deep in thought, and smiled. He was not very proud, but was very satisfied with his calculation of the interests of Haotian Taoism and the hearts of people. The heavenly power pill gradually melted in his stomach and turned into a spring stream of fresh medicinal power. It slowly flowed through his body and repaired his severely damaged organs. It even began to nourish the snow mountain and ocean of qi that had been somewhat dried up after being rebuilt in the South Sea. Longqing could clearly feel all this. He even faintly guessed that when the medicinal power of the heavenly power pill completely melted into his body, his snow mountain and ocean of qi would be completely restored. At that time, in addition to the lifetime cultivation of the half-man Taoist that he had swallowed, his state would be able to return to its previous peak state. It was even possible that he could directly cross the threshold and enter the realm of knowing destiny. He had once lost everything, and only then would he know how difficult it was to regain it. He had once been glorious, and only then would he know how difficult it was to climb back to the peak. He recalled the arrow on the snow cliff in the wilderness, the bloody hole in his chest, the desperate journey into the night, and the steamed bun in the ruined temple in the capital of the Yin Kingdom. Longqing's eyes became slightly moist. Then he felt his body become a little lighter, as if he was about to float. Then, he realized that this was not an illusion, nor was it an illusion. It was the medicinal power flowing through his body, constantly washing away all the dirt and filth, washing away all the dust and mortals that originally belonged to the world from his bones. He became light, so light that he was about to float and float into the distance. It was a feeling that seemed illusory and real. It was a side effect of the peerless medicinal power of the heavenly power pill gradually transforming into the aura of a cultivator. The smell released by the medicine seemed to become some kind of real gas that slowly seeped out of his pores and slowly enveloped his entire body. Long Qing did not forget those regrets in his intoxication. Although he had used a seemingly simple but actually unbreakable deduction to avoid the danger of death, he knew that he would probably be imprisoned in the Jisho Abbey and would wait for the Abbey Dean to return to make a decision. He would naturally not be able to keep the tomes of arcane in his arms. However, what happened next was not what he had expected. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said indifferently, "I admire your reaction speed and countermeasures. But you seem to have forgotten that you can ignore the rules as crazy as you are. But Haotian Taoism and our Taoist Abbey still have their own rules." Long Qing frowned slightly and wanted to say something. However, the middle-aged Taoist did not say anything else. He casually slapped his palm toward the top of his head. The palm looked so simple. It did not have the power of a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts. However, it contained a mysterious aura. It was as if it was in harmony with the laws of heaven and earth. There was no way to avoid it. Long Qing could not avoid this palm. No matter how miraculous his encounters were, he still could not avoid the palm of a powerhouse at the peak of knowing destiny state. The huge gap between their states was like the will of Haotian, unstoppable. Looking at the palm that was getting closer and closer, Long Qing's face revealed an expression of despair and unwillingness. The middle-aged Taoist palm landed heavily on Long Qing's forehead. However, unexpectedly, Long Qing's head did not fall like a ripe fruit, nor did it burst like a ripe watermelon. It was still intact. The middle-aged Taoist raised his eyebrows, as if he had sensed something very unbelievable. Before the palm that contained the truth of heaven and earth touched Long Qing's head, it first met the aura that burst out from the heavenly power pill in his body. An extremely dull sound burst out in front of the meadow. Writing is very tiring. I'm writing the 3rd chapter anyway. I really don't know when I'll update it. Anyway, I'll sleep after I finish writing and touch everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 521. In Long Qing's mind, there was nothing wrong with his decisiveness and response. He had completely mastered human nature. It was not a weakness, but a trait. However, he had forgotten an important point. The common trait of human nature must have appeared many times in history. In other words, his decisiveness and response seemed wise, but in fact he was just copying the wisdom of his predecessors. He was still walking the same old path. Until now, Long Qing still did not know the middle-aged Taoist's name and surname. However, after the Taoist in indigo was chased to the South Sea by the headmaster of the academy with a wooden stick, he had enough wisdom and insight to temporarily manage the Jisho Abbey. To him, Long Qing's response was filled with a stale and disgusting aura, which was increasingly unacceptable to him. If he could not accept it, then he would have to suppress him forcefully. Without hesitation, he slapped Long Qing's head, ignoring the precious heavenly power pill that had been swallowed. He did not care what Long Qing meant to Haotian Taoism. He only wanted to protect the rules and bottom line of Haotian Taoism. However, to everyone's regret, to the world's regret, and to Ning Kei's regret in the future, the middle-aged Taoist palm did not manage to kill Long Qing. Instead, it was strangely bounced back by the faint yet extremely tough aura that enveloped Long Qing. Long Qing, who was close to madness, was no longer bound by any moral rules. That was why he could do so many rebellious things. However, there were rules in Haotian's world. To a large extent, he had to thank these rules for being able to survive, such as the forces of action and reaction. The middle-aged Taoist's casual but irresistible palm landed on Long Qing's head, causing his teeth to clench and his facial features to tremble. However, it did not break through the thin aura. The huge and terrifying power was bounced back by the aura film, causing his palm to bounce up high. With a bang, Long Qing's feet left a deep pit on the hard meadow ground. The pants on his legs were torn into pieces and flew away. He felt a sharp pain in his leg bones, as if they were broken. Smoke and dust filled the air. Long Qing, who had been hit by the palm, was like a rubber ball that had been slapped hard on the ground. He suddenly paused and then bounced up into the sky at a terrifying speed. There was a whistling sound of wind breaking. Long Qing bounced into the sky, high and far. He was confused and did not know what to do. He felt the autumn wind blowing on his face and looked at the clouds that were getting closer and closer. He thought of the light feeling he had after taking the heavenly power pill. He could not help but wonder if he would really become an immortal and leave this terrible human world. A single heaven ascension pill couldn't really make a mortal become an immortal. As long as one did not become a deity, no matter how high one flew, there would always be a moment when one would fall back down. Long Qing was shaken off the ground and floated up. He didn't know whether he had flown hundreds of feet or thousands of feet. Just when he felt that he could touch the blue sky and the flowing clouds, he began to fall. Apart from his sages who could return to Hao Yian's divine kingdom, most people's final destination was the earth. The attraction of the earth to humans was so strong that it carried a lot of power. The power made Long Qing fall faster and faster. He left the clouds and broke through the autumn wind. He watched as the middle-aged Taoist crossed the meadow and fell into the precipice behind the meadow. He disturbed the clouds that had not dissipated for years and went straight into the bottomless abyss. Falling from such a high place, even a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state would be shaken into a pile of flesh and blood. Moreover, no one knew what kind of dangers there were in the abyss. Long Qing fell into the abyss with the tomes of arcane. The middle-aged Taoist walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the clouds flowing like a lake disturbed by stones. He was silent, and no one knew what he was thinking. No one knew whether Long Qing was alive or dead. He might be alive, but he should be dead. But who knew? The middle-aged Taoist looked at the human-shaped hole that was gradually swallowed by the flowing clouds. He thought silently, if you are still alive, then maybe you really are the legendary man of heaven's mandate. In the green mountain behind the Jishou Abbey, muffled or shrill sounds could be heard from time to time. The green vines scattered on the mountain path and in the dense forest trembled with these sounds, as if they were extremely afraid. These sounds came from the terrifying Taoist priests who had been hiding in the cave for decades. These Taoist priests did not deliberately show their power. They just felt something in their hearts and talked casually, but it made the green vines and red soil tremble uneasily. Dozens of caves shook and almost collapsed. Why? Why do I see hope? But it is such a cold hope. I want to kill that junior. That piece of trash sure has guts. How dare he have evil thoughts about us? Why didn't Taoist he do anything before he died? What did he see? The will of Hao Yin or the shadow of Yama? Is this the real man of heaven? The cliff that was still tightly wrapped by the vines suddenly became quiet. No one spoke for a long time. The old Taoist priests in the cave thought of the scene they saw earlier. They thought of the truth they had vaguely understood. For a moment, they all fell silent at the same time. After a long time, an extremely deep voice sounded between the cliffs. The birds that were trying to find nesting materials in the dense forest at the foot of the mountain heard this voice and immediately scattered in all directions in fear. Whether it is the will of Hao Yin or the shadow of Yama, regardless of whether it is the decree of heaven or the original sin of mankind, the appearance of this young Hao Yin Taoism disciple in front of us has already explained many things. Senior brother He's cultivation was taken by that young man, but he did not kill him before he died. This means that he did not want to resist this temptation. An old and resentful voice came from one of the caves. If it were me, as long as Long Qing could inherit all my achievements and then destroy the academy and the Tang Empire, maybe I would be willing. I have had enough of living in seclusion for decades. If it were not for that lunatic Kuhauren sword, I would be sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade now. Lotus would not have taken my position, and I would not be able to see the world and people for the rest of my life. An extremely cold voice came from another cave. If you are really willing to pass your achievements to that young man, then why did you kill him before? In the end, you are still reluctant to give up the opportunity to escape. Don't talk about the past, and then talk about reluctance. We old guys who are trapped in the cave have all shed blood and tears. When the headmaster of the academy went to the peach mountain to cut the peach blossoms, if I was not in front of him and was seen as seriously injured, Wei Guangming would not dare to expel me from the peach mountain because of those groundless accusations. The old voice said mockingly, "As the elder of West Hill and the senior brother of the great divine priest of Revelation, you actually had fun with the wife of an ordinary believer in the kingdom of song. If it were not for the fact that you were seriously injured by the headmaster of the academy, do you think that Wei Guangming would just expel you from the Peach Mountain? What are you trying to say? I want to say that you can totally pass your cultivation to that useless Long Qing. Why don't you? Because I will have to go out one day. Even if the mountain collapses and the sea dries up, you will not be able to go out. Stop arguing." That extremely thick voice filled with boundless might exploded between the cliffs, causing the green vines to rustle and the birds that were about to fly to fall to the ground with mournful cries. It was obvious that the old Taoist priests in the cave were very afraid of this voice. Senior brother, he was cut in half by Kuhauren and lived a life worse than death for decades. Unlike us, we can still see the light of day one day. It is not necessarily a bad thing to have such a vicious successor. But we are different. Although our old injuries are serious, it is not to the extent that we cannot suppress our realms. As long as there is a chance, we can leave these caves and the Jishou Abbey. Whether that vicious young man, who even I am afraid of, is dead or alive, he is far away from us. What we need to do now is to meditate and wait in silence. Any memory of the glory of the past is a poison in the heart. Even without that young disciple, you will still be possessed by the devil. There was dead silence among the cliffs. No one dared to object because the old Taoist priests in the cave knew very well that no one was more qualified to recall the past than that person. If he had not been defeated by Kuhauren's sword, the owner of the deep voice would definitely be sitting at the top of the West Hill Divine Palace and leading the entire Haotian Taoism as the hierarch. After an unknown amount of time, the voice came from the cliff again. The green vines did not move, but the red soil that seemed to be stained with blood began to rustle because of the despair and hatred in the voice. Will we really be able to leave these caves alive? Can we really see the light of day again? How long do we have to wait? We've already waited for decades. Some people have already died of old age. Don't tell me we'd rather continue waiting? These questions, filled with resentment, despair, and unwillingness, were like the cold rain in late autumn, constantly washing the cliff outside the cave, bringing endless pain to the people inside the cave. After a long time, that deep and resounding voice rang out again. It was filled with frustration, determination, hope for the future, and resentment towards a certain person. It said in a deep voice, "Wait, wait forever, prepare, always be prepared, wait, prepare for that old bastard to die. This is the only thing we can do." Decades ago, the devil's doctrine was at its peak. Correspondingly, there were many powerhouses in Haotian Taoism. If the West Hill Divine Palace were to go all out, it seemed that they could sweep the world. Then, there was a youngest uncle from the academy. That youngest uncle's name was Kuhauren. He rode a little black donkey and wore an inconspicuous sword at his waist. He first destroyed the devil's doctrine, and then, for one reason or another, or perhaps because of a different ideology, he began to fight against the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. In the midst of the bloodshed, no one knew how many amazing cultivation geniuses of Haotian Taoism were killed by Kuhauren's sword or seriously injured by him, or forced to break the realm and be punished by heaven. Since then, they did not dare to come out. One day, the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism gathered and surrounded Kuhauren. Kuhauren won the battle. Then, he was punished by heaven and died. After that, the headmaster entered West Hill and climbed the Peach Mountain. He killed all the peach blossoms, killed those who participated in the battle, and seriously injured the rest. The Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey and the Taoist in Indigo welcomed him. The headmaster hit him with his cudgel. The Taoist in Indigo was defeated and fled to the South Sea. From then on, he never set foot on land. Decades later, there was a green mountain behind the Jisho Abbey, and the caves in the cliff were like ant nests. There were countless powerhouses with terrifying states, but were seriously injured. Half of them were killed by Kuhauren, and the other half by the headmaster. If these powerhouses of Hao-Ian Taoism reappeared in the world, no one knew how terrible the storm would be. However, they could not come out, and the world had even forgotten about their existence. Because the headmaster did not allow it. The headmaster is so awesome. I feel like I'm pretty awesome too. I actually wrote it. Actually, to be precise, I should say that my father's power is awesome. Good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 522. When Longqing woke up, he was greeted by a thick miasma fog, a thick layer of rotten leaves on the ground, and endless pain in his body. He had actually survived after falling from such a high cliff. Even he himself could not find any reasonable answer. Perhaps the faintly discernible ancient trees above the miasma had reduced the force of his fall, or perhaps the thick, soft bed of rotten leaves and sludge had played an effect. Longqing felt that it was Hao-Ian's will that allowed him to survive. Just as he had mentioned in the conversation with his uncle in the Jisho Abbey, if he was really the legendary person of the Heaven's Mandate and carried the most obscure will of Hao-Ian, then Hao-Ian would not have let him die so easily. He really did not die. This fact gave him infinite confidence, but also a lot of confusion and fear because he did not know what to do next in his life. Although the mud and rotten leaves were soft, many of Longqing's bones were still broken. However, the real pain was not the physical injuries, but the two powerful auras that were constantly clashing in his body. When he was unconscious, the aura of the Halfman Taoist in the Tianqi state was no longer bound by his will. It roared out from his sense of perception and from all parts of his body, turning into countless sharp steel knives that kept scraping his bones, cutting his muscles, and even trying to blast his snow mountain and ocean of qi into ruins. At the same time, the heavenly power pill contained the aura of the spirit herbs, which continuously healed the cracks in his bones and the broken meridians in his muscles, nourishing his life force and repairing his ocean of qi and mountain of snow over and over again from the ruins, relying on the last remaining shadow. This was a process of continuous destruction and repair, and it was extremely painful. It did not matter when he was unconscious, but now that he had woken up, the pain became the most real existence. Longqing's face instantly turned snow white, and an extremely miserable scream burst out from his bleeding teeth, spreading far and wide in the quiet forest at the bottom of the valley. Because the pain was so intense, Longqing almost fainted again as soon as he woke up, but he knew how important it was for him to be awake at this time. If he fainted in the dense forest at the bottom of the valley full of poison and unknown dangers, he would not be able to hold on for long. At that time, no matter how merciful Hao-Ian was, he would have to abandon him. With another miserable howl, Longqing slammed into a stone not far away from him, breaking one of his ribs. He used the fresh pain to suppress the rest of the pain. Before he passed out, he fought for a moment to gather his spirit and mind. He sat cross-legged in the lotus position and began to meditate to heal himself. Time passed slowly. Longqing's face was pale, and the blood on his Taoist robe had long solidified. He sat on the rotten leaves and mud, maintaining the same posture. His chest did not rise or fall, as if he was no longer breathing. He looked like a corpse that had been dead for a long time. However, the two auras were still fighting in his body. The medicinal power of the heavenly power pill and the Halfman Taoist aura of the Tianqi state had completely cleaned up his body and original aura, turning him into an empty barrel. The extremely poisonous miasma around him kept pouring into his body, changing it to the smallest extent possible. After an unknown amount of time, the sky in the dense forest at the bottom of the valley was still dark. Long Qing's body trembled slightly, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Inconceivably, this mouthful of blood was black in color. It was unknown whether it was because of the poisonous miasma or something else, but the blood in Long Qing's body had turned black. It looked like ink, but also like the rotten water in a swamp. Many days ago, a black peach blossom had grown on the side of the boat in the South Sea. Long Qing had plucked the black peach blossom and wore it on his chest. He had never taken off since. In the process of escaping from the cave in the Jishou Abbey, the black peach blossom on his chest had been stained with a lot of blood. The red and black color was exceptionally beautiful and eerie. At this moment, it had been stained by the black blood again, and suddenly there was a faint black light. Then, the light quickly faded, leaving only a pure black that was as cold as the night. Long Qing, who was sitting on the rotten leaves, seemed to have turned into a black peach blossom. The surface temperature of his body gradually became colder, and he gradually blended into the surrounding environment, as if he had become a part of the miasma in a pile of rotten leaves. Colorful poisonous snakes slithered through the rotten leaves and circled around Long Qing's body a few times. They did not seem to notice anything strange, and then they slithered away. There was also a mountain monkey with a face like that of a ghost. It screamed and swam in the forest, squatting beside Long Qing's body. It acted coquettishly, calling for its partner, and then left in boredom. Withered leaves fell. The wind blew, and the withered leaves flew again. Long Qing was still sitting, unaware, and blended into the surroundings. At this moment, even if a cultivator carefully perceived him, they could not separate him. And this was the most obvious sign that he had entered the knowing destiny state. He did not know how much time had passed. Long Qing opened his eyes and woke up. There was no longer the joy of surviving a disaster in his eyes, nor was there any confusion about the unknown future, nor was there any pain. There was only calmness and indifference. The calmness towards the world and himself was absolute indifference. He stood up. The black peach blossom on his chest became even darker and more alluring. At this moment, a peach blossom formed by pure aura bloomed behind Long Qing. That was his natal peach blossom. It had also turned black. At the moment when this black natal peach blossom bloomed, the dense fog in the dense forest was shrouded by an aura of quietus. The colorful poisonous snake that was resting under the rotten leaves stiffened and then died. The ghost-faced monkey in the distant forest screamed in horror and began to flee further away. Under the pursuit of the South Jin Kingdom Army, especially with the addition of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall, there were only a dozen people left. Only 5 of the cavalry commanders were still alive. These people, who had once enjoyed supreme glory in the West Hill Divine Palace, had now become sinners. They fled like dogs in the forest around the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Almost every day, someone died, and almost every day, someone was seriously injured and abandoned. They did not know how long they would have to flee. What made them even more desperate was that they did not know what the end of this escape was. Even if it was the end of despair, at least they knew where the end was. They were now sinners of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the world of Haotian, no country dared to take them in. The only country that had the power to take them in was the Tang Empire, which would definitely be more willing to cut off their heads. Where would the end of their escape be? How would they die? Zemo's face was thin, and he looked tired. His eyes were filled with numbness. He looked at the wilderness at the foot of the mountain in the twilight. He looked at the land that belonged to the kingdom of Song. He knew that the Taoist temples there had already gotten their portraits. Even if they wanted to sneak into the people, it would be impossible. Thinking of the wish that he had made at the beginning of his escape, Zemo's face revealed an extremely painful expression. He murmured, "As long as I can survive, I am willing to dedicate my life and soul to Yama. I'm not afraid of falling into depravity. However, how arrogant is this? Why would Yama care about ants like you and me? Even if you want to dedicate, how can you get close to such a great existence? If a mortal wants to get close to greatness, it usually takes a process and a guide. A cold voice sounded from a cliff. Zemo's expression suddenly changed. The dozen or so fugitives behind him picked up the weapons in their hands as fast as they could. They looked at the cliff warily and were ready to attack at any time. A young man stood at the edge of the cliff, looking in the direction of the setting sun. He wore a black Taoist robe that blocked the setting sun, so his figure looked extremely dark. The slightly cold autumn wind blew from the wilderness and went up the cliff, rolling up the corner of the black Taoist robe. From time to time, a few rays of twilight would leak through. The fugitives had lived in the West Hill Divine Palace for a long time. Looking at the man at the edge of the cliff, they felt that there was some kind of illusion in front of them. It was as if they saw the shadow of Hao Yin, or perhaps they saw the shadow of Yama. After days of escaping, their nerves had been stretched to the point that they were about to break. The place they chose to camp was extremely remote and secretive. However, they did not expect that they would be discovered and approached quietly. In their view, the person who could quietly appear at the edge of the cliff must be extremely powerful. If it was not a master from the Kingdom of Song, then it could only be a powerhouse from the West Hill Divine Palace. The fugitives, whose cultivation had been destroyed, did not expect to defeat a powerhouse from Haoyin Taoism. The moment they heard the voice, despair occupied their bodies and minds. In the midst of despair, they forced out an extremely strong fighting spirit. Since they were going to die anyway, and today might be their last battle, then they should die a heroic death. However, no one made a move, because the young man in a black Taoist robe at the edge of the cliff gave people a feeling that they could not challenge him. Moreover, Zemo suddenly knelt behind the young man and cried bitterly. Then, more people recognized the young man, especially the 4 former commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. They trembled and ran to the edge of the cliff, knelt down behind Zemo, and cried bitterly to the back of the young man, just like shepherds scattered in the wilderness who saw their master. Commander Zemo looked at the back of the young man, with tears streaming down his face. He said in a trembling voice, "Priest, everyone said that you were dead. You are still alive. This is great." A commander with a broken arm wailed and said, "Your Excellency, Your Excellency, I knew that you would not abandon us like this. You are finally back." Long Qing turned around and looked at his former subordinates. He said, "Are you willing to follow me again?" The crying at the edge of the cliff gradually stopped, and everyone kowtowed again and again. Zemo raised his head and looked at the scar on Long Qing's face. He looked at the black peach blossom on his chest and thought of the rumors. He was shocked to find that the priest was not only not dead, but his cultivation state was far higher than before. However, a very cold aura seeped into the depths of Zemo's and everyone's hearts. This cold aura came from Long Qing. It also came from his words. "I did die before, but I don't know whether I saw Hao Yin or Yama after I died. During the time when I died, I thought about many things. However, it was not until I heard Zemo's words that I suddenly realized that maybe I am not the son of heaven's mandate at all." Long Qing looked at the night sky and said thoughtfully, "Maybe I am a son of Yama. I was hit in the waist by anxiety, so I don't want the monthly vote today. The foreplay is basically done, and it is about to start. Anxiety is heavy. After thinking for a long time, I decided that it is necessary to update and get more monthly votes, but I still need to pay more attention to the plot. I'm working hard to write, and please supervise me. I hope that I can write the climax of the next 6 months well. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 5:23. For cultivators, among the 5 states of cultivation, the 2 most important passes were the initial awareness state and the knowing destiny state. The initial awareness state was the first thing ordinary people saw when they set foot on the road of cultivation. At that time, how much a cultivator could see would basically determine how far he could go in the future. The knowing destiny state, on the other hand, made it possible for a cultivator to be detached from the mortal world. Therefore, the moment cultivators crossed this threshold, they could often see the future that they could not see and sense some mysterious omens. After escaping from the Jisho Abbey and falling off the cliff, Longqing meditated in the poisonous fog at the bottom of the valley and broke into the knowing destiny state. Longqing was now a grand cultivator, and his cultivation state had long surpassed that of the past. However, he was not like those seniors recorded in the West Hill scriptures, who could sense the future the moment they entered the knowing destiny state. It was not until now, when he stood on the edge of the cliff, watching the setting sun and listening to ZMO and the others' cries, that he vaguely sensed something. The sun was about to set, and the world was about to return to darkness. What he had done could be considered as deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors. His current state of mind was so cold. So all these years, was he really following the will of Hao Yin, as the Abbey Dean said, or was he deceiving himself and others? Had he already turned his back on the world of light and resolutely thrown himself into the long night to become the vanguard of Yama? Longqing looked at the setting sun gradually being swallowed by the mountains, and a self-mocking smile appeared on his face. He could not confirm any of his speculations because it was a realm that he still could not reach. Listening to Longqing's words, ZMO and the others felt cold all over. However, this coldness did not last long because they had seen too many deaths and suffered too much humiliation on their way to escape. They knew that compared with the cold eyes and autumn wind of the world, the real night was safer and even warmer. Once again, they kowtowed to Longqing to show their loyalty. ZMO knelt in front of Longqing and said in a bleak tone, "Priest, I dare not deceive you. When we went down the Peach Mountain, our cultivation was destroyed. Now we just have more knowledge and experience than ordinary people in the world. I don't know what your purpose is this time, but I think you must want to do something big. I am worried that not only can I not help you, but I will also drag you down." Longqing looked at him and said calmly, "What I need is your absolute loyalty. As for your cultivation being destroyed, it is not a big deal. I heard that you are now called the Fallen Knights. Please become stronger and fall with me, all the way to the bottom of the abyss." After saying this, he took out a medicine box from his bosom. ZMO sensed the pure medicinal power coming from the item in the medicine box and could not help but tremble. His face revealed an expression of disbelief as he said in a trembling voice, "Master, this is he and the other Fallen Knights' cultivation was destroyed by the Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, but their Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi were not destroyed. They were only locked by the secret method of Haotian Taoism. If they wanted to restore their cultivation, they would need at least 3 powerhouses at the level of great divine priests to force their way through or encounter a series of miracles like Ning Quebec. Along the way, the Fallen Knights never expected to restore their cultivation because they knew that they could not get help from 3 powerhouses at the peak of knowing destiny, and there were not many miracles in the world. Until they met their former direct superior, Prince Longqing, at the edge of the cliff. The medicine box in Prince Longqing's hand contained the earth-sitting pill. The earth-sitting pill was not a divine medicine of Haotian Taoism, but from the Buddhism sect. Although this kind of elixir was not like the heavenly power pill, which could heal the dead and prolong life, it had an unimaginable effect in clearing the acupoints and cleansing the heart. It was not unimaginable to reopen those locked acupoints. The Fallen Knights took the elixir from Zemo's hand with trembling hands and took it. Then they closed their eyes and sat cross-legged. The elixir was called the Earth-Sitting Pill, which meant to become Buddha by sitting on the ground. At this moment, they were sitting on the ground. They believed that even if they recovered their cultivation, they still could not become Buddha, but they could become demons. The cliff became darker and darker, gradually becoming pitch black. Longqing, who was wearing a black Taoist robe, seemed to be one with the dark night. Looking at his subordinates who were sitting on the ground, digesting the elixir and trying to break through the Snow Mountain lock, his expression was very calm. He did not feel pity for using up the earth-sitting pill that he had painstakingly refined. He also did not worry about whether his subordinates would remain absolutely loyal to him after they recovered their strength. In the past few years, he was the priest of the Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, the third most important person in the Black Divine Hall. Because Yi Hongyu was obsessed with cultivation, he was personally in charge of the internal affairs of the judicial department, especially the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall who were directly under the judicial department. These cavalrymen were all his absolute confidants. After Yi Hongyu became the great divine priest of judgment, she punished these cavalrymen cruelly for the absurd reason of glancing at her in the crowd. Other than establishing her authority, part of the reason was that she wanted to completely erase Longqing's influence. Because of the past, Longqing's trust in these fallen knights was reasonable. Most importantly, the earth-sitting pill contained his painstaking efforts. When these fallen knights took the earth-sitting pill, they would become Longqing's painstaking efforts. They would not be able to hide anything from Longqing. As an important part of Haotian Taoism, the celestial master Taoism of Mount Longhu had always been the most staunch follower of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the relatively remote kingdom of Qi, they had many direct followers. The current celestial master Zhang was even more of a noble existence in the kingdom of Qi. The Taoist temple on Mount Longhu was built with golden walls. There were many green trees planted around the stone platform, which did not change color even in autumn. When a mountain breeze blew, the treetops swayed gently. It was like a fairyland. However, today's Mount Longhu no longer looked like a fairyland. It seemed to have become the legendary underworld. Countless Taoist corpses lay on the stone platform. Broken limbs hung on the treetops. The smell of blood permeated the air. The main door of the Taoist temple was tightly shut. The blood that flowed out from the crack of the door was about to coagulate like glue. In the Taoist temple, the yellow-robed celestial master Zhang looked at the group of black-clothed Taoists in front of him with a pale face. His trembling fingers held the last piece of fu paper. At this moment, all the disciples of the celestial master Taoism had died in battle. He was the only one left alive. The problem was that he did not know why he was still alive. Celestial Master Zhang cultivated talismans and had reached the peak of the see-through state. He was only one step away from the knowing destiny state. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace thought that he could break through the realm in 30 years and become a precious divine talisman master. Therefore, he was greatly respected every time he went to the West Hill Divine Palace. However, he did not see any respect in the eyes of these black-clothed Taoists, not even for their enemies. These black-clothed Taoists' eyes were calm and cold. They looked at him as if they were looking at a dead man. "You sinners, didn't the great divine priest destroy your cultivation? How did this happen?" Celestial Master Zhang's face was pale, and his voice was hoarse with fear. He recognized the faces of several of these black-clothed Taoists. He knew that they were the fallen knights who had been expelled from the West Hill Divine Palace. However, he had heard a few days ago that these fallen knights had been chased like dogs by the army of the South Jin Kingdom and Haotian Taoism. Why did these fallen knights suddenly come to Mount Longhu? Moreover, they had recovered all their strength and were even more powerful. These 16 black-clothed Taoists had all entered the see-through state. 5 of them used to be commanders of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. The powerful aura they exuded proved that they were already at the peak of the see-through state. Commander Zimo, in particular, had even faintly touched that piece of paper and could break through to the knowing destiny state at any time. Other than powerful countries like the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom, which other country in the world could gather so many powerhouses? These black-clothed Taoists possessed such power that the disciples of Mount Longhu could not contend with them. In particular, these black-clothed Taoists had shown a chilling coldness and even bloodlust in the previous battle. That coldness and bloodlust made them even more powerful and terrifying. Celestial Master Zhang was terrified and confused. He did not know what had happened. These sinners who had blasphemed against Haotian not only did not die, but also became so powerful. None of the black-clothed Taoists answered his question. They just stood silently in the middle of the Taoist temple and looked at him as if they were looking at a dead man, as if they were waiting for someone to come. Longqing appeared in the Taoist temple out of nowhere. He was also wearing a black Taoist robe. The edge of the Taoist robe was embroidered with a golden belt, like a picture painted by the sun beside the dark clouds. Celestial Master Zhang looked at Long Qing and said in disbelief, Prince Long Qing, you are actually not dead. Long Qing said calmly, if you had experienced my life in the past 2 years, you would probably know that it is also very difficult to want to die. Celestial Master Zhang suddenly understood. He glanced at those black-clothed Taoists and roared hoarsely, this is all you're doing? You lunatic! Aren't you afraid of being abandoned by Hao Yin? Long Qing said, perhaps Hao Yin abandoned you, Celestial Master. Celestial Master Zhang said desperately, if that is the case, then do it. Long Qing did not say anything, but just looked at him quietly. Celestial Master Zhang suddenly found that Long Qing's eyes had changed. The line between the black pupil and the white of his eyes suddenly blurred, and a very faint gray was emerging. He did not know what was going to happen next, but he guessed that what was going to happen next must be very terrible. He screamed and crushed the last talisman. A wall of fire appeared out of nowhere and quickly closed with his body as the center. He was about to be burned to ashes. Celestial Master Zhang stared at Long Qing through the wall of fire and roared angrily, you devil! Don't even think about it. Long Qing's expression did not change. The next moment, his figure appeared in the wall of fire. A black peach blossom bloomed behind him. A cold aura was generated in the Taoist temple. The wall of fire suddenly went out. Long Qing's eyes turned completely gray and extremely gloomy. Celestial Master Zhang felt that the psyche power in his body was being sucked out at a high speed. There was extreme fear in his eyes. Looking at Long Qing's still beautiful face, he cursed with resentment and despair. You will die more miserably than me. With a bang, Celestial Master Zhang's withered body fell to the ground. Long Qing closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, everything had returned to normal. He walked out of the Taoist temple. The 16 black-clothed Taoists, led by ZMO, followed behind him silently. Whether it was their steps or aura, they all secretly followed Long Qing's rhythm and charm. They gradually turned into a whole and then melted into the night. The heavy door of the Taoist temple slowly opened. The autumn mountain wind gradually blew, fluttering Long Qing's clothes. He felt that he had become a little stronger. It was a good feeling. There will be a high school reunion in the evening. I guess there will be a drink. There will only be one chapter today. However, although tomorrow is Saturday, there will be no rest. At least there will be an update. It's just that I won't write much. Although I'm thick-skinned, there's a limit to how thick-skinned I can be. I wish everyone a happy day. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 524. In autumn, a mysterious force appeared in the world. That power massacred Mount Longhu and killed Zhang Tianshi. Then, it destroyed several branches of the true martial Dao sect. Following that, it began to wreak havoc in the Song Nation, continuously exterminating sections. Its methods were extremely cruel and bloody. Those who went to investigate afterwards felt that it was a tragic sight. It was said that this mysterious force was made up of more than 10 masters in the see-through realm. The leader wore a silver mask. These people rode on black horses and wore black Taoist robes. They came and went like the wind. Their whereabouts were mysterious, and they were cruel and merciless. They did not even have a normal human nature. They were extremely cold and bloodthirsty. The entire southern continent was shocked. The cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace and the armies of various countries attacked repeatedly in an attempt to kill these Black Knights. However, they could not even catch their traces. The higher-ups of the Divine Hall and the royal family of the South Jin Kingdom had already connected these Black Knights with the fallen knights. However, they could not understand why these fallen knights, whose cultivation had been destroyed, could regain their strength and become even more powerful than before. What made them even more confused and frightened was who the man in the silver mask was. There was a clear stream in the mountains. A piece of red leaf floated on the stream. It was like a decoration on a mirror. It looked extremely beautiful. It was quiet all around. Suddenly, The hooves of the horses stepped into the stream, crushing the red leaves and disturbing the calm surface of the stream. Then, even more hooves stepped into the stream. The birds by the stream let out frightened cries and flew away quickly. More than 10 black-clothed riders crossed the stream and followed the mountain path to the southwest. No one in the troop spoke. Even the frequency of the black-clothed riders' breathing was exactly the same as that of the horses' hooves. And the object of this frequency was the silent young man on the horse at the very front. The West Hill Divine Palace and the armies of other countries were setting up defenses at the border of the Kingdom of Song, trying to intercept and kill these black-robed knights. No one would have thought that these black-robed knights could easily pass through several interception lines and come to the Qingling Mountains in the southwest of the South Jin Kingdom. More than 10 black knights temporarily rested beside a stone spring on the mountainside. The fallen knights sat cross-legged and meditated. Having regained their strength and majesty, they did not want to go back to the sad life of fleeing. Therefore, they did not want to waste any time to recover their strength and cultivate. After an unknown period of time, the fallen knights opened their eyes and woke up. They looked at Prince Longqing, who was meditating under the tree by the cliff with fanatical worship in their eyes. Before the drastic change of the snow cliff, Prince Longqing had been their direct superior. He had gained the absolute loyalty of many people in the judicial department. Not to mention that these fallen knights could continue to live because of him. Moreover, they were living so arrogantly. In addition, they had spent so much effort in the earthly pill. Their loyalty was unquestionable. After escaping from the Jishou Abbey and returning to the mortal world, Prince Longqing had recruited a group of loyal subordinates from various countries in a short period of time. Most of them were the spies from the judicial department hidden in the Taoist temples and the marketplace. These spies were now his eyes. Therefore, the encirclement of the West Hill Divine Palace cavalrymen and the armies of various countries was no secret to him. He and his subordinates could still easily deal with them. Of course, this was also because the West Hill Divine Palace did not know his identity and did not pay enough attention to him. In the eyes of the Divine Palace, these fallen knights were just rats who had survived for a few days in the glory of Haotian. After all, they could not live forever. If the West Hill Divine Palace knew that the commander of these knights was Longqing and that he had committed unforgivable crimes in the Jishou Abbey, the intensity of the pursuit would naturally be much more terrifying. With such a terrifying existence as the West Hill Divine Palace, as long as they really got serious, no matter how many adventures Longqing had, no matter how powerful these fallen knights were, they would be crushed into powder. Thinking of this inevitable possibility, Zimo's face revealed a trace of worry. He walked to the edge of the cliff and bowed to Longqing, who was sitting under the tree. He whispered, "Priest, now that the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall have been alerted, it is obvious that the judicial department knows about this. If Great Divine Lord Yi personally takes action." Longqing opened his eyes and looked at the green hill in the distance that was like a mountain, but not as steep as a mountain. He said, "What do you want to say?" Zimo said, "Your Excellency, I suggest that we leave the sphere of influence of the Divine Hall as soon as possible. The glory of Haotian shrouded the world. The sphere of influence of the West Hill Divine Palace was the entire Central Plains. Although the Tang Empire was an exception, these fallen knights whose hands were stained with blood would certainly not be stupid enough to enter the Tang Empire. Therefore, there was only one way left for them, and that was to leave the Central Plains." Longqing was silent. Although he was powerful now, especially after sucking the cultivation of Master Zhang and several elders of the martial arts sect, he was even more powerful. However, he still did not have the confidence to defeat that woman, because that woman had already sat on the seat of heavenly black jade. She had proved with blood that at least in some periods of her life, she was stronger than the previous great divine priest of judgment. Longqing had never thought that he could escape for a long time in the sphere of influence of the West Hill Divine Palace. When he was not absolutely powerful, such as the peak of the human world, the longer he stayed under the glory of Haotian, the more dangerous it would be. He looked at the green hill in the distance and said indifferently, "Leaving the Central Plains is an inevitable choice. However, before leaving, I really want to do one thing." A few days ago, he had obtained a piece of intelligence from a Taoist temple in the South Jin Kingdom. That intelligence was actually meaningless, at least to his great cause of leading these fallen knights. However, that intelligence was like a stone that pressed on his heart, causing his breathing to quicken. The intelligence said that Ning Ke had brought his little handmaiden, who was good at drinking, to attend the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival in the Lang Temple with the diplomatic corps of the Tang Empire. However, after passing through the Great Swamp, Ning Ke left the diplomatic corps with his little handmaiden for some unknown reason. They took a black horse carriage and traveled alone. According to the specific figures in the intelligence, the horse carriage was not far from where Long Qing and the others were. It should be traveling in the mountains and was about to reach the green hill on the opposite side. Long Qing raised his head slightly and took a deep breath. He felt that he could smell the scent of the horse carriage in the mountain wind. He smelled the fragrance of wine on the little handmaiden and the foul smell on Ning Ke's body. No matter what the smell was, it made him feel intoxicated. His handsome face was slightly flushed, and the inconspicuous scar on his cheek seemed to light up. He was clearly expressionless, but in the depths of his eyes, which were rapidly changing between black and white and gray, there seemed to be flames burning. Long Qing's chest rose and fell slightly. He squinted his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly. He said, "Only by killing that person can my Taoist heart be truly clear. And I want to suck away all of his cultivation, the cultivation that has the smell of the academy. The smell of the academy is rare and very pleasant." His voice was very calm and indifferent. However, ZMO felt that he saw a legendary monster called Tao Tai under the tree. He subconsciously felt fear. It was a kind of fear of absolute greed and coldness. As the most loyal and most useful subordinate, no matter how afraid he was, even if it would make the Lord unhappy, ZMO still had to give his opinion. He reminded in a low voice, "During the time when you were in seclusion, something happened. I heard that Ning Ke killed Xiaoho in a head-on challenge, and it is said that his little handmaiden will become the divine priest of light. She is not an ordinary person either." Long Qing did not say anything. He slowly put on the silver mask, stood up, and walked to the horse by the spring. As he walked, the gray in his eyes gradually turned turbid. The dust under his feet slowly floated up, like bees chasing the soles of his boots, and finally became willing stepping dust. Looking at this scene, ZMO was even more in awe and did not dare to say anything more. More than 10 black cavalrymen roared down the mountain. Standing under the tree by the cliff, one could see the great green mausoleum among the mountains in the distance. There were many weeds in the mausoleum, and there was not a single tree. The view was very wide, and there was a Buddhist temple on the top of the mausoleum. Even though it was very far away, one could feel the dilapidated aura of the Buddhist temple. Naturally, it could not be the Lang Temple. One could faintly see a few patches of red in the temple, but one did not know what they were. They took the Tang warship across the Great Lake and went ashore at Moling in the South Jin Kingdom. Ning Ke proposed to leave the diplomatic corps and go ahead with Sang Sang, which immediately attracted a lot of opposition. Xiao Chao could not bear to be separated from Sang Sang, and the girls from the House of Red Sleeves could not bear to lose the opportunity to be close to Mr. 13. As for Xian Zhilong, the imperial general, his consideration was much more direct. He only thought that it would not be safe for Ning Ke to leave the diplomatic corps with Sang Sang. When faced with Xian Zhilong's reminder or warning, Ning Ke's answer was also very direct. "Don't forget that I am the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. I have taken away Wang Jingla's title. Those who could defeat me will know my identity and background, and they will not dare to provoke me. Those who are blinded by passion and dare to provoke me will not be able to defeat me." Xian Zhilong found that Ning Ke's words were very correct, so correct that there was no way to refute it. In this world, those who could defeat Ning Ke must be those grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. Grand cultivators had their own sects and inheritances. How would they dare to provoke Ning Ke and risk the Academy's wrath? Therefore, Ning Ke bought a lot of liquor at Moling Ferry and arranged for the diplomatic corps to visit the South Jin Kingdom government. After settling the matters of entering the state cities, Ning Ke and Sang Sang left the diplomatic corps in a black horse carriage. The reason why Ning Ke had to leave the diplomatic corps and travel alone was because he was worried about Song Song's illness. Although Song Song's illness did not seem to worsen, it did not seem to be getting better either. Since the headmaster of the academy said that the Lang Temple could cure Song Song's illness, Ning Ke naturally had to go to the Lang Temple as soon as possible. The Black Horse carriage left the South Jin Kingdom's official road at Moling Ferry and followed the roads between the state cities, heading southeast. It drove on a simple mountain road in the remote mountains and crossed rivers and streams. It did not deliberately hide its whereabouts, nor did it interact with the world. It just focused on rushing on the road in silence. As time passed, the sound of the carriage became more urgent. The autumn leaves on the top of the mountain gradually turned red, and the autumn wind on the mountain road gradually became cold. They were getting closer to the Lang Temple. Perhaps it was because they were getting closer to the Lang Temple, the world gradually became more Buddhist. Occasionally, they could see a few temples on the road. Although they were not as prosperous as the Taoist temples, they were not lacking in popularity. One day, there was a sudden autumn rain. The autumn sky and the rain became increasingly gloomy. However, the maple tree in the broken temple on the Qingling Hill became increasingly red. Ning Ke put down the curtain and looked at Sang Sang, who was lying on his knees. He looked at the tired expression on her face and said, "There is a temple in the mountain, and the scenery is not bad." Chapter 1. The next chapter will come out before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:25. The dilapidated temple had a horizontal board on the door, on which the word Red Lotus was written. Ning Ke did not expect that such a remote mountain temple would have an official name. When he helped Sang Sang into the temple and saw the blood-red autumn maple trees in the courtyard, he understood the reason. The rain was dripping, and the temple was filled with a slight dampness. Ning Ke found the monks in the temple and took out the banknotes, saying that he would stay here for the night, and that his wife preferred peace and quiet, so she did not want to listen to other sounds. The two monks did not understand at first, and they were not willing to leave the temple in the rain. But when they saw the amount on the banknotes, they suddenly became understanding. The Red Lotus Temple was very shabby, and there was nothing valuable. Even the statues of arhats in the main hall were made of mud. They were not as important as the banknotes, so there was no need to care about them. The two monks boiled a pot of water and left some daily necessities for Ning Quebec. They told Ning Ke that there were a few acres of monk fields at the foot of the mountain and where they would live. Then they left the temple under a broken umbrella. It was still early, but Ning Ke was a little hungry since he did not have anything to eat on the journey. He went to the back kitchen of the temple and tasted a few plates of vegetarian dishes prepared by the monks. He felt that they tasted ordinary, so he took out a big bag of dried meat from his luggage and pinched 2 handfuls of ginseng roots, throwing them into the pot to make a big pot of meat soup. When the soup cooled down, he carefully fed a small bowl to Sang Sang and soaked his rice with the meat soup. Then he fished out the ginseng fragrant pieces from the pot and threw them outside the threshold. The big black horse smelled the ginseng fragrance and came over curiously. He lowered his head and sniffed the meat, but found that it was not fresh meat, and it was made of ginseng roots instead of whole ginseng. So he walked away disappointedly and went to the maple tree to hide from the rain. Ning Ke was a little annoyed and scolded. "The ginseng and gnomes that 11th brother gave us are almost all gone. If you're still as picky as an old bull, be careful that you will starve on the road." The big black horse ignored him and raised his head to smell the fragrance of the maple tree. He thought proudly that even though he was a fool, he was also a fool of the academy. Even if he did not want to eat the food of the world, he still wanted to pursue the state of eating wind and drinking dew. Song Song's illness was a little serious, and the cold aura in her body was very annoying. However, it was not as terrible as the time in Chong, and even though she had an attack. Maybe it was because of her successful cultivation of divine skill, or because she had been soaking in liquor for days. She just looked sick and listless, and she felt tired easily. Ning Ke scooped up another piece of meat, poked it with chopsticks, and then mixed it into the rice. Sang Sang took the bowl and ate it with great effort. After drinking half of the liquor today, she suddenly looked much more energetic. Bear with it. We will reach the Lang Temple in about 4 days. In order to make a fire at night to keep warm, Ning Ke carried 2 large pieces of firewood and sat on the threshold. He lowered his head and chopped. He thought that although the black horse carriage was comfortable, it would inevitably be a little bumpy. If they met a good inn on the road, he should let Sang Sang rest more. Sang Sang lay on the monk bed with the quilt covering her lower body. She looked at Ning Ke, who was busy, and suddenly thought of the days many years ago. At that time, it was not her who cooked and chopped firewood at home, but him. Feeling her gaze, Ning Ke looked back into the room. He looked at the tired expression on her slightly tanned face and said seriously, "I don't know why the headmaster can't cure your illness, but I believe what he said. The elders in the Lang Temple can definitely cure you, so don't worry." Sang Sang softly nodded. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said with a serious expression, "If anything happens in the Lang Temple, don't pay attention to it, especially the divine skill. You can't use it anymore. You just need to take care of your body." Sang Sang lowered her head in silence and did not respond softly for a long time. Ning Ke knew that this request did not mean anything to her. If he really encountered any danger, she would not care about her body. He could not help but shake his head speechlessly. Just like in the past 16 years, he could never win against his little handmaiden, no matter in any aspect. After resting for a while, Sang Sang felt a little better. She looked at the beautiful maple trees in the temple courtyard through the door, and her eyes revealed a happy expression. Since she was sick, Ning Ke had been paying attention to the slightest change in her expression. He looked at her eyes and felt slightly relieved. He helped her up from the bed and walked to the porch to look at the trees through the rain. The Red Lotus Temple was really dilapidated. Several temple walls had collapsed, and even the stone steps of the main door had not been leveled for many years. Ning Ke really stopped the horse carriage in the courtyard. At this time, the autumn rain was bleak and the red maple trees were like fire. The black horse carriage stopped under the maple trees. Ning Ke naturally thought of a poem and recited, "Stop and sit in the maple forest at night. The maple leaves are red." He was born early and came early. Many of his memories had long been blurred or even disappeared. There were only some very basic things that were hard to forget. He could not remember much of the poem, but he could not forget the content of the text. However, at this time, he and everyone in the world did not know that he had remembered the frost leaves as maple leaves. He did not finish the poem because he felt that Sang Sang's thin arm, which he was supporting, had become a little stiff. He looked at her worriedly, but did not see her frowning in pain. Instead, he saw a shy and slightly red face. Sang Sang lowered her head and murmured in a very soft voice, "We are not married yet." Ning Ke knew that the little girl had misunderstood the 2 words in the poem. He could not help but smile bitterly. Then he remembered that many years ago, there seemed to be a little boy in the classroom who used the 2 words in the poem to flirt with other little girls. He could not help but be slightly startled and felt as if it had been a lifetime ago. However, he did not understand that it was really a lifetime ago. After a moment, he woke up from this rare emotion. He reached out his hand and touched Sang Sang's face, saying, "What's the difference whether we are married or not? You and I can't be separated in this life." Sang Sang raised her head and softly said, "I am worried that there is a difference." Ning Ke was slightly surprised and asked, "What difference can there be?" Sang Sang whispered, "They all say, if we are really together, we will not like each other, at least not as much as before." Ning Ke said with slight annoyance, "Where did this come from?" "It's all because of that girl Xiao Qiao. She has nothing better to do than to instill these messy worldviews in you." Sang Sang looked at him and stubbornly asked, "But will we not like each other?" Ninkei's answer was very natural, and without thinking, of course not. Sang Sang said, but Xiao Xiao said, there are many girls in Chang and who are spoiled by their husbands before marriage. But after they are married, they will feel bored after 2 or 3 years. Ninkei looked at her and said with a smile, you have to understand. You have been married to the Ning family since you were born. It has been 16 years since then. Have I ever felt bored? Have you ever felt bored? Since you have not felt bored for so many years, then naturally you will not feel bored in this life. Even if you do feel bored, you will only feel bored when you are together. Sang Sang blushed slightly and said, Ninkei, your words are getting better and better. Ninkei asked with a smile, why don't you call me young master? Sang Sang said, you can't be young master when we're talking about love. Ninkei said, that makes sense. Sang Sang suddenly said, but you still like other women. Ninkei's body shook and he said, where? Your Highness? That is the budding of a young man's feelings. He has no sense of direction. If you look deeper, you can probably see the fantasies that all the poor boys in the world have for princesses. Sister Dewdrop, she is the teacher's dish. Don't be so disrespectful. But you said that you really want to touch and rub her. This is a matter of touch and desire. Are you saying that my touch is not good? Another one, another one. Where is the calligraphy addict? Ah, the wind is a little strong. Let's go back to the room first. The big black horse, who was originally taking shelter from the rain and practicing self-cultivation under the maple tree, woke up when Ninkei and Sang Sang began to talk about certain topics. He pricked up his ears and stared at them with his eyes wide open, for fear of missing a word or missing Ninkei's embarrassment. Seeing that Ninkei was about to help Sang Sang into the room, the big black horse felt bored and scolded Ninkei in his heart for being shameless. Suddenly, he faintly smelled a very faint smell in the autumn rain. He could not help but raise his head in confusion. Sang Sang looked at the temple gate in the rain and said, someone is coming. Ninkei stood still for a moment and suddenly said, get on the carriage. The important luggage was all in the carriage, so there was no need for a coachman. Soon, they were ready to leave. The big black horse's mane was wet in the autumn rain, but it was not loose and stuck. It was like a sword stabbing everywhere. It was very irritable at this time, because it confirmed that the faint smell in the rain was the smell of blood. It had never smelled such a strong and extremely cold smell of blood, not even on the battlefield. In the autumn rain came the hurried sound of horse hooves. It should still be under the mountain. It was very far away and could not be heard, but Ninkei, Sang Sang, and the big black horse could hear it very clearly. The black horse carriage drove out of the Red Lotus Temple. Ninkei lifted the curtain and looked down the mountain. There were no trees in the green mountain, only long wild grass. It was late autumn, and the grass was frosty yellow. It was blown down by the rain and the autumn wind. The originally excellent view became clearer. The autumn rain was not dense, but could not block people's sight. They saw more than 10 black riders moving along the 3 mountain roads at a high speed. The people on the black horses wore black Taoist robes. Their bodies were dark, as if the night had come to this world earlier than the day. It was full of chilling and gloomy atmosphere. These black riders were as fast as lightning. The horses' hooves broke the mud on the road, and the Taoist robes broke the fine rain. Ninkei looked through the window and remained silent, confirming that it was too late to leave. The big black horse neighed restlessly and kicked the accumulated rain on the ground impatiently, as if it wanted to rush and kill. Sang Sang lowered her head and coughed gently. The black iron bow had already taken shape in her small hand. Ninkei suddenly asked, what level? Sang Sang raised her head, holding the big black umbrella in her right hand. She looked at the black riders through the window and frowned slightly, as if she could not believe her own perception. She said, all of them are in the see-through state. Then she added, 5 of them are in the upper see-through state, and 1 of them has reached the peak. Ninkei's face darkened slightly, but his eyes were still calm, just a little puzzled. This is the 2nd chapter. The next chapter may be a little later. I will try to finish it before 1:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 526. Who would harm him? Who would dare to harm him? Ning Ke frowned as he thought of his conversation with Xian Zhilong at Moling Ferry, especially after Sang Sang confirmed the cultivation state of the Black Cavalry. In the unknown places like the Academy's back of the mountain, or the Jishou Abbey, or the Xiankong Temple, the see-through realm was very common. Ning Ke had met many cultivators in the knowing destiny state. But in fact, it was very difficult for ordinary cultivators to enter the see-through realm. The masters in the see-through realm in ordinary sects, even if they were not the sect masters, must be extremely important figures. It was impossible for there to be too many of them. Now the dozen Black Cavalry on the mountain road were all cultivators in the see-through realm, and there were even masters at the peak of the see-through realm. This surprised Ning Quebec. He could not think of anyone else in this area besides the Lang Temple who could have so many masters. Of course, the Black Cavalry could not be monks from a Lang Temple because they wore black Taoist robes. Moreover, Ning Ke sensed some familiar killing aura from them, so he was sure that they were soldiers, or at least they had lived in a military camp. Could they be from the South Jin Kingdom? Ning Ke's gaze fell on the approaching Black Cavalry through the window. Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows and said, "They are not from the South Jin Kingdom. I smell a disgusting smell." Sang Sang asked, "What smell?" Ning Ke said, "The unique smell of corruption from the West Hill Divine Palace. Even if there's a lot of quietus in their aura, there's still no way to cover up the smell." After confirming the possible origin of the enemy, he no longer hesitated. He took the iron bow and talisman arrow from Sang Sang, pushed open the skylight at the top of the carriage, and stood up. The autumn rain continued. Ning Ke pushed open the skylight and stood up. The chilly rain, accompanied by the chilly autumn wind, blew on his face, but it could not change his expression at all. He looked calm, put an arrow on the bow, and slowly pulled the bowstring. The iron bow gradually bent, and the bowstring made a squeaking sound, but the bow and the bowstring did not tremble at all. The dark talisman arrow, containing great power, silently rested on the bow. The arrowhead aimed at the Black Cavalry, running at high speed on the mountain path, as if it would be shot in the next moment. The primordial 13 arrows, created by combining the wisdom of the Academy and the resources of the Tang Empire, was undoubtedly the most powerful long-range weapon in the cultivation world in the past century. To some extent, it had even surpassed the flying swords of grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. Magical weapons had their own souls. This iron bow and talisman arrow had once killed Long Qing and injured Yi Hongyu. It was also stained with Xiaoho's blood. At this moment, it was ready to be shot. Even the autumn rain around the horse carriage seemed to be afraid and slowed down a bit. There was still a long distance between the temple and the Black Cavalry on the mountain path. Ning Ke had locked their breaths with the talisman arrow in advance. As a master in the see-through state, the Black Cavalry should have felt the danger and had great fear. However, what made Ning Ke feel cold was that the Black Cavalry did not seem to feel the danger at all. They still maintained a complete formation and a murderous aura. The horses' hooves were flying, splashing the mud on the mountain path like flowers, and the layers of rain were constantly broken. Only a truly cold and confident person could do this. The autumn rain gradually became heavier, and the curtain of rain gradually became thicker. The raindrops hit Ning Ke's face one by one, and fell on the dark and sharp arrowhead, but could not shake him and the Bow Mountain. After the skylight was pushed open, the autumn rain mixed with coldness seeped into the carriage. Before Ning Ke stood up, he used his feet to kick a quilt to cover Sang Sang. However, Sang Sang saw that he did not shoot the talisman arrow for a long time, and knew that something was wrong. She lifted the quilt and stood up. Out of the corner of his eye, Ning Ke looked at her pale little face and her haggard eyebrows. He slightly frowned and said, "Lie down. We'll talk when you can't hold on." He did not say that he did not need her in this battle, because he faintly felt that today's battle would be very dangerous. During the battle, even if it was a white lie, it would bring disaster to both of them. Sang Sang did not listen to him. She stood up with some difficulty, coughed softly, and squeezed past him. She stood out of the skylight and opened the big black umbrella with a swoosh. If she really couldn't hold on, then she should open the big black umbrella. The big black umbrella kept the autumn rain outside, and Sang Sang used her sleeves to wipe the rain off Ning Kei's face. This was not the warmth before the battle, but she would not let any small factor affect Ning Kei's battle. Being like water droplets kept falling on the thick surface of the black umbrella, making a puffing sound. Ning Kei's face was shrouded in the umbrella's shadow and looked more and more solemn. After a period of time, more than a dozen black cavalrymen had galloped past the mountainside and would arrive at the temple in a moment. However, Ning Kei did not shoot the talisman arrow because he faintly felt that there was something wrong. The other side seemed to be waiting for him to shoot. The black cavalrymen on the mountain road were very strong, but at this distance, even a master in the see-through realm could not avoid the primordial 13 arrows. Ning Kei had absolute confidence in this, so he was not afraid at all when Sang Sang confirmed the enemy's state. As a person from the academy who entered the human realm, no matter how humble he was, he knew that anyone who dared to kill him must have a full understanding of his fighting methods and style in advance. In other words, the black cavalrymen on the mountain road knew very well that once he shot the arrows, they would die. However, they seemed to be fearless, which could only mean that these black cavalrymen were courting death. It was such a difficult thing to cultivate to the see-through realm. Other than faith and true love, what else was worth courting death for? Ning Kei pondered silently. He only knew that these enemies were willing to pay such a terrible price, so they must be covering up the more terrible real killing intent. Holding the big black umbrella in her small hand, Sang Sang suddenly frowned and said, "Someone is coming again." Ning Kei looked at the approaching black cavalryman on the mountain road and said, "Find him." Holding the umbrella, Sang Sang's hand trembled slightly. She frowned painfully and said in a low voice, "I'm not sure." Ning Kei squinted his eyes, and a drop of rain slid down his cheek. Even with the cover of the autumn rain, no matter how skillful one's body movement was, it could not avoid Sang Sang's perception. Sang Sang said that she was not sure, which meant one thing. The real hidden enemy was at least a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. The black cavalrymen were approaching, and for the first time, Ning Kei and Sang Sang could really hear the sound of hooves like a storm. The big black horse no longer neighed, but just coldly looked at the strong figures of its kind. Its black eyes were bursting with a strong desire to fight and a manic mood of destruction. They could vaguely see the faces of the people on the horses, but Ning Kei was not as agitated as the big black horse. He still maintained a terrible calmness and did not shoot the talisman arrow on the iron bow. The powerhouse in the knowing destiny state hiding in the autumn rain must have hoped that Ning Kei could shoot all the iron arrows in the box. Even if he didn't, the powerhouse in the knowing destiny state would find a chance to kill him when Ning Kei focused on killing the black cavalryman. If he focused on the strong, knowing destiny state, he would not be able to stop the black cavalryman from coming to the temple. At that time, the power of the primordial 13 arrows would be greatly reduced. In the case of close combat, Ning Kei did not have much confidence to fight against more than a dozen strong see-through state and a strong, knowing destiny state. Or rather, he had no confidence at all. The rain kept hitting the big black umbrella, making muffled sounds. It gradually mixed with the dense hooves not far away, bringing a strange and tense atmosphere to the ruined temple. Sang Sang held the handle of the big black umbrella harder and harder until it trembled. Then she coughed painfully. Her originally dark face became paler and blood dripped from the corner of her mouth. Ning Kei's heart suddenly tightened, but he said nothing and did not stop her. A pure light suddenly flashed in the depths of Sang Sang's glass-like eyes, like lightning. Then she closed her eyes tightly and said two extremely complicated numbers. Ning Kei suddenly turned around. The dark, sharp arrowhead left a line of rain in the air. He loosened his index and middle fingers on the iron bowstring. He turned around and shot the arrow. The whole movement was extremely natural and smooth. The iron arrow was aimed at the depths of the Red Lotus Temple behind the horse carriage. There were several trees there, all of which were maple trees. The tip of the arrow was aimed at one of them. The frost leaves were redder than blood. The primordial 13 arrows appeared in the world again. There was no thunder this time, but it quietly sneaked into the autumn rain with the wind. The distance from the skylight of the black horse carriage to the maple tree in the ruined temple was about 100 feet. In the air of 100 feet, there appeared a channel that absolutely rejected other chi of heaven and earth. It was the arrow. A few drops of rain, fortunately or unfortunately, were not shaken away by the chi of heaven and earth carried by the talisman arrow. They stayed in the invisible arrow space and floated alone like shivering orphans. These drops of autumn rain were not broken, and it seemed that they were not actually penetrated, because the talisman arrow that left the iron bow did not seem to be real. But the iron arrow was still there. When it hit the target, in a flash, the iron arrow shot the maple tree that was waving its red leaves in the autumn rain. It was too slow to describe with any measure of time. The maple tree did not break. The red leaves that floated off the branches were not shaken off by the arrow, but by the rain, because it was a black peach blossom on the maple tree. The iron arrow just hit the black peach blossom. The peach blossom was pure black, so black that it seemed to be reflecting light. It was so black that it gave people a sense of beauty. It was like the night of the far north wilderness, where one could occasionally see an extremely beautiful and otherworldly luster. But after looking at it for a long time, one would find that the black on the peach blossom was just a simple black. It was extremely pure black. It was the night itself. It was the black abyss shrouded in the night. Black was devouring. This black peach blossom seemed to be able to devour everything in the world. The iron arrow, which contained a terrifying power, disappeared into the black peach blossoms just like that. It was like falling into a bottomless black swamp. There was no trace left. Looking at the black peach blossom and his most powerful attack being annihilated so easily, Ning Kei's eyes did not show any fear. Instead, they became brighter. At the moment when his eyes began to brighten, the second iron arrow had left the bowstring. It shot to the black peach blossom on the maple tree again. This is the third chapter. There will be a fourth chapter, but it will be slower. I will try to finish it before 3:40. To be continued. If you like this work, please come come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:27. If a stone was thrown into the water, it would not come back, but at least one could see the beautiful ripples on the water. If a dog was thrown with a meat bun, it would not come back, but at least the dog would bark after eating the meat bun. However, the first iron arrow that Ning Kei shot did not have any reaction after entering the black peach blossom. It had been prepared for a long time, and it could even be said to be the most powerful attack to kill. But the enemy easily dissolved it. If it was an ordinary person, he might feel desperate upon seeing such a scene. Ning Kei did not have such a feeling. The powerhouse in the knowing destiny state had been hiding in the dark, trying to distract his attention with the dozens of black cavalries on the mountain road, or to consume the iron arrows in his box. This meant that the person was afraid of the primordial 13 arrows. In this case, this arrow must have been effective. In addition to the rational analysis, what made him still confident was the distinct characteristics of the academy, and the pride and confidence that the longer he stayed with the headmaster of the academy, the more unshakable he became. The primordial 13 arrows were the collective wisdom of the academy. Ning Kei firmly believed that no one in the world could ignore its power. Even super powerhouses like the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, the great divine priest of West Hill, or second brother could not quietly dissolve the iron arrow. In the spring 2 years ago, the talisman arrow was just made. Ning Kei shot it for the first time, and second brother waved his sleeves to block it. His sleeves were almost torn by the iron arrow. Even if the person hiding behind the maple tree was a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state, he was nothing compared to second brother. How could he dissolve the iron arrow so easily? The black peach blossom on the maple tree seemed to swallow the iron arrow like an endless abyss. It did not seem to be affected at all, but Ning Kei was sure that the opponent must have paid the price and been hurt. But he could not see it but it did not mean that it did not exist. Therefore, he did not hesitate and shot the second iron arrow without stopping. The iron arrow broke through the air, shot into the black peach blossom, and disappeared again. The trunk of the maple tree, which was wet by the autumn rain, trembled a little. Other than that, there was no other change. Ninkei looked calm, without fear or despair in his eyes. He shot the third iron arrow. The iron arrow disappeared in the black peach blossom again. This time, the wet maple tree shook more violently. Pieces of red leaves fell from the branches and fell to the ground with the autumn wind. Ninkei shot another arrow. The black peach blossom finally changed. The shapeless black petals condensed from the pure aura of heaven and earth trembled, and the edges of the petals showed signs of withering, as if they were going to fall off together with the red leaves. Ninkei shot the fifth iron arrow. The sharp arrowhead pierced into one of the petals of the black peach blossom. This time, it finally hit its body. An extremely deep crack appeared on one of the petals of the black peach blossom. A loud bang resounded. The black peach blossoms disappeared without a trace. The hard maple tree bore the remaining power of the iron arrowhead on. How could it withstand it? In an instant, a huge hole was blasted in the tree, and with a cracking sound, it was snapped in two. The dense red leaves of the maple tree were shattered into countless shreds by the aura of the arrow. They scattered into the air in the courtyard of the temple, and then were splashed onto the ground by the dense autumn rain. The shreds of maple leaves dyed the autumn rain blood and fell on the ground, on the broken maple tree, on the man behind the maple tree, and on the silver mask on his face. The silver mask covered half of the young man's face. Only half of his face was exposed, but it could still be imagined that he was handsome. However, at this time, his body was stained with blood like rain, and he looked a little miserable. Looking at the man behind the maple tree, Ninkei and Sang Sang couldn't help showing a shocked expression. In the house by the Yanming Lake, Yi Hongyu had mentioned once intentionally or unintentionally that this man might still be alive. But they did not pay attention to it because even if he was still alive, he must have been disabled. However, this man was actually still alive, and he was even more powerful than before. I can't believe you are still alive. Ninkei looked at the young man in black Taoist robe in the autumn rain. He could not help but be a little absent-minded as he thought of the continuous fights and hatred with this man over the years. The half of Longqing's face outside the silver mask was extremely pale, almost without a trace of blood, as if he had not seen the sun for a long time. A very thin trace of blood slowly flowed from the corner of his mouth. Ninkei did not hesitate and fiercely shot 5 primordial 13 arrows consecutively, and finally left an indelible mark on his natal peach blossom. Of course, he was also seriously injured. Longqing had encountered many adventures, entered the knowing destiny state, defeated many heads of cultivation sects in the world, and strengthened his psyche power with the gray eye skill. At this time, there was no doubt that he was at his best stage. He was confident that he could defeat Ninkei, but he did not expect that he would be injured as soon as they met. He did not expect that Ninkei would ignore the threat of more than a dozen black cavalrymen and fight with him, as if he was gambling with his life. In addition, there was a more important reason. After entering the knowing destiny state, one could really understand the real law of the flow of the aura of heaven and earth. If he wanted to avoid Ninkei's primordial 13 arrows, there should be a better way. Just like Yi Hongyu, who entered the knowing destiny state on the snow cliff. Although she might also be embarrassed, she should be less injured. But Longqing did not want to hide. The first half of his life was destroyed by an iron arrow. Now that he was reborn, he seemed to be unparalleled in the world. However, the horrible power of the primordial 13 arrows was still a shadow in his Taoist heart. If he could not defeat the primordial 13 arrows, he could not really erase the shadow, and he could not really feel the power of pride. This kind of emotion was so strong, and this kind of desire was so unstoppable that he couldn't restrain his impulse. He wanted to try and see if he could block that iron arrow head on. He did, and he did block it. Longqing felt an extremely spicy breath reverberating in his chest, and even his eyes became sore. He looked at Ning Ke on the horse carriage and was about to say something, but his expression suddenly changed. When he saw Longqing reappear in front of him, Ning Ke was indeed a little absent-minded. If he had time to sigh, he might have many complicated emotions. But he was a professional soldier, a standard fighter, and a woodcutter by the Juju Lake. Before he was sure that he had killed or completely defeated a powerful enemy, he did not allow himself to have any time to sigh. He thought that it was suicide to be sad at this time. Did they have to bow to each other, ask each other about what happened after they parted, ask about each other's well-being, and reminisce about the past before fighting? Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu both looked down on such idiots. In their eyes, Prince Longqing and many powerful cultivators were all idiots. Since they were idiots, why should they live? Just when Prince Longqing was feeling emotional, touched, sad, and sentimental, and was about to say something to Ning Ke to show his pride and strength, just when his eyes were sore and his lips were about to separate, Ning Ke once again pulled the bow and arrow before he could say a word. His action of pulling the bowstring was so natural and even showed a natural aura, which made people unprepared and alert in advance, and made people feel that it was inevitable. Longqing's face became paler, and his black Taoist robe, which had been soaked by the autumn rain, suddenly floated up. He seemed to melt into the autumn scenery in the temple garden. Obviously, one could see where he was, but it always gave people a feeling that when the iron arrow came, he would not be there. With a deep understanding of the circulation of the aura of heaven and earth, one could integrate one's self with nature and use the power of nature to fight. This was the real meaning of the knowing destiny state. The blood-colored fragments floated in the wind, as if covering Longqing's body without a trace. Ning Ke looked calm, without a trace of uneasiness. Holding the big black umbrella, Sang Sang looked at the erratic figure of Prince Longqing in the courtyard of the temple and gave him a direction. Ning Ke loosened the bowstring, and the arrow shot out. The distance between the inside and outside of the temple was not far. The maple tree had been destroyed, and the autumn rain had stopped, and the black peach blossoms had faded. This iron arrow perfectly released all the power of the primordial 13 arrows. The air in the temple fluctuated, and the chi of heaven and earth suddenly became chaotic. Several invisible black peach blossoms appeared from nothingness, and with a thought, they blocked in front of Longqing. These black peach blossoms were rather small, and not his natal peach blossoms. Instead, they were his ultimate defensive skill. Back in the wasteland, it was these peach blossoms that allowed him to avoid a crushing defeat in front of Tang Xiaodong's unreasonable bloodsaber. Now that Longqing had entered the knowing destiny state, the defense of these peach blossoms was even more amazing. They contained extremely rich and pure chi of heaven and earth, and attached with a frightening sense of silence. However, after all, they were not natal peach blossoms. The peach blossoms bloomed. The arrow arrived. The peach blossoms fell one after another. The black petals broke and then turned into green smoke, disappearing in the autumn rain. The iron arrow moved forward and came in front of Longqing. Longqing's face showed a shocked expression, and then it all turned into coldness and cruelty. Coldness and cruelty to others and himself. He used his chest to meet the iron arrow. There was a puff. The iron arrow pierced through the black Taoist robe. It shot through Longqing's body. It shot through the broken back wall of the temple. Then it shot into the rain, and no one knew where it flew. There was a hole in Longqing's chest. Standing in front of him, one could see the scenery behind him. It was not beautiful, but very scary. Anyone who had a hole in his body that could see the scenery should not be alive. Longqing was still alive because the hole in his chest was not pierced at this time, but a long time ago, on the snow cliff, when Ning Ke shot through it from dozens of miles away. Since then, the hole had always been there. Today's iron arrow had flown through the arrow hole from back then, so he did not die. However, the strong aura attached to the iron arrow still tore the internal organs in the hole. Long Qing bent over and coughed violently. Every time he coughed, there was blood. Ning Ke had already taken out the seventh iron arrow and was pulling the bow. His fingers on the bowstring were no longer stable and slightly trembled. He knew that this was the best chance. It might also be his last chance today. Long Qing suddenly raised his head. His eyes were indifferent. Deep in the indifference was the wild fire of hatred. This is the fourth chapter, and I will definitely continue to write it. At this time, I will go and lie down for 2 or 3 hours. Recently, my biological clock has been very good, and I am sleepy. I will get up after 6 o'clock. Don't worry that I can't get up. I have something on my mind. I will start writing after breakfast. I will try to finish this large plot before evening and try to make everyone happy. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 528. In the autumn rain, the Red Lotus Temple on the Green Mountain suddenly became solemn. Long Qing waved his sleeves in the rain. His sleeves danced lightly, and the wind and rain blew. This flick contained his absolute fury. This anger came from the arrow hole in his chest, the years of humiliation, pain, and despair. It was also because of the huge gap between the beginning of today's battle and his imagination. In his imagination, he was gifted with unique skills, inherited the amazing cultivation of the Halfman Taoist, and had entered the knowing destiny state with the help of the heavenly power pill. Moreover, he was far from an ordinary knowing destiny state cultivator. Today, when he returned to the world, he should walk out and defeat Ning Ke easily, making this enemy who had brought him endless darkness fall into despair. However, who would have thought that from the beginning of the battle, he had always been at a disadvantage? To be exact, he had been in a passive and humble position, without any chance to fight back. His domineering cultivation of the knowing destiny state had not been shown at all, and he had been seriously injured. After dodging 6 primordial 13 arrows by a hair's breadth, there was still 1 arrow on the iron bowstring. After 7 arrows, Long Qing was suppressed to the point of suffering. He was humiliated to the extreme, but also angry to the extreme. This seemingly simple flick of the sleeve contained the anger that had been suppressed for a long time and the fighting spirit that had been suppressed to the extreme. Once it was unleashed, its power was astonishing. The rain on the broken stone steps of the Red Lotus Temple was suddenly swept away. Countless water droplets were swept into the sleeve wind and then attacked the black carriage wantonly. The majestic and violent chi of heaven and earth, mixed with the rain, seemed to be no slower than the primordial 13 arrows. Every drop of rain seemed to have become a feather arrow or a hard stone. What made Ning Ke feel inexplicably scared was that the water droplets that were rushing toward him seemed to be painted with a touch of light black under the clear light of the rain, revealing a strange sense of danger. Ning Ke groaned and shot the 7th iron arrow. Then he pushed Sang Sang into the horse carriage as fast as he could. At this time, the sky full of black rain was in front of him. He only had time to move the big black umbrella in front of him. The sky full of rain, like dense arrows, hit the surface of the big black umbrella. There was also a lot of rainwater hitting the sidewalls of the carriage. The black carriage trembled violently, as if it could flip over at any time. It looked like a small boat in the middle of the ocean, looking extremely frail and pitiful. The black rain was so dense that the big black umbrella could not completely block it no matter how big it was. Ning Ke did not notice that a few drops of rain floated into the carriage through the gap and fell on Sang Sang. He gripped the handle of the umbrella tightly, the joints of his right hand slightly pale, and blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. It had nothing to do with the black rain. It was because he had forcefully shot the 7th iron arrow, because he was in too much of a hurry, and because he was slightly afraid of the black rainwater. This arrow did not hit Long Qing's body. The primordial 13 arrows consumed a lot of psyche power. When it was first developed, Second Brother once said that Ning Ke could only shoot a few arrows before he became weak. His current state of strength was far better than it was in the past, and he could have shot all 13 arrows. However, He shot 7 arrows in a row today without any pause in between, nor did he have a chance to rest and recover. It was like 7 consecutive lightning strikes in the rain clouds. Such a high-frequency and high-density shooting was a very terrifying thing. Even when he was fighting against Xia Ho at Yiming Lake last winter, he had never done this. Fortunately, his cultivation of the Great Spirit gradually strengthened his body after joining the devil. Otherwise, Ning Ke would collapse after shooting 7 iron arrows in a row. At this time, the muscles on his arm were still seriously injured, and there was a sharp pain in his right shoulder joint. It would be difficult for him to pull the iron bow in a short period of time. What chilled and shocked Prince Longqing the most was not the power of Ning Ke's primordial 13 arrows, nor was it Ning Ke's strong means and willpower in the battle. It was because he knew very well what kind of person his opponent was. He just could not understand why Ning Ke's 6th iron arrow could hit him. If he had not humiliated himself by using the hole in his chest to avoid the arrow, he might have been seriously injured or even killed. However, he had already entered the realm of fighting in the knowing destiny state, and his whole body had become one with the surrounding nature. Ning Ke's cultivation was only in the see-through state. How could he have been able to capture him? Longqing found that Ning Ke still had many secrets. Perhaps those secrets were not with him, but around him. For example, the little handmaiden who held the big black umbrella earlier. Longqing looked at Ning Ke's wet but unchanged face. He said with a slightly strange expression, "You really are a monster." Ning Ke looked at Longqing, who stood behind the stone steps, and looked at the hole in his chest. He said, "You are a monster." Longqing walked down the stone steps and said expressionlessly, "You are the same." Ning Ke said, "You are welcome." Longqing said, "This time I will not be polite. It is your turn to die." Ning Ke said, "Why do you say so?" Longqing looked at the iron bow in his hand and asked with a smile, "Can you still shoot?" Ning Ke's heart gradually turned cold, but the smile on his face was more sincere. He said, "A gentleman has nothing to fight for, so he must shoot." Longqing said, "My people have arrived. If you can still shoot, then please shoot." Ning Ke's smile gradually stiffened. Longqing's expression became more and more elegant. In the autumn rain, the dozen or so black cavalries on a mountain road finally arrived in front of the Red Lotus Temple. 7 consecutive arrows were shot like 7 lightning bolts. At this time, only a short period of time had passed since Sang Sang shouted Longqing's position. It could be imagined how amazing the speed of these black cavalries was. Ning Ke's cultivation was at the peak of the see-through state. Even if he was really invincible below the knowing destiny state, even if he had other powerful skills besides the primordial 13 arrows, and even had the confidence to defeat ordinary cultivators in the knowing destiny state, it was impossible for him to defeat Prince Longqing, who had entered the knowing destiny state, and the dozen or so see-through state masters alone when Sang Sang was seriously ill. He could not even escape from their siege. At this time, the enemy could not be sure that he really could not shoot again. So Longqing did not make a move, but waited vigilantly for an opportunity. However, even if he could find an opportunity to recover and shoot again, he did not know where to shoot. If he still tried to kill Longqing, how could he resist the ferocious fallen knights that were coming soon? The outcome of this battle seemed to be unchangeable and hopeless. However, at this moment, the stiff smile on Ning Ke's face suddenly became lively, like a land that had been dry for a long time, suddenly being moistened by a cool mountain spring. Longqing noticed the change in his expression, and his heart trembled slightly. The cold autumn rain kept pouring on the big black horse's head, but could not extinguish the irritation and fighting desire in its eyes. However, just as the smile on Ning Ke's face changed, the irritation in the big black horse's eyes suddenly disappeared. It looked at the black cavalrymen who were rushing towards the horse carriage with an extremely disdainful expression, as if it was looking at a group of idiots. The fallen knight in the front began to silently activate his psyche power. His right hand left the reins and began to pinch the sword formula. The flying sword in the scabbard on his back began to buzz. The black horse on his back panted quickly and excitedly. The long hair on the horse's neck kept flying in the rain with the final acceleration of the sprint, which looked full of power and beauty. At this moment, a strand of hair floated up. This scene was extremely subtle and not easy to notice, so it did not attract anyone's attention. Prince Longqing's expression changed dramatically, and he shouted a warning. However, the Black Knights were sprinting at a high speed. Even if the fallen knights understood his warning and had enough discipline to carry out his orders, they could not retreat. They could not retreat from this battlefield. This was the battlefield that Ning Ke had arranged. The black horse that was sprinting at the front stepped heavily into the muddy ground and was the first to rush up the Qingling Hill. But it could not continue because its hooves were broken. Then, a thin red line appeared on the thick neck of the horse. More fine red lines appeared on the strong body of the horse. Because of the uneven strength exerted on different parts of the body, the red lines gradually widened and then separated. The entire body of the horse became countless pieces of meat floating in the air, and there was vaguely blood between the pieces of meat. The horse's head at the front quietly separated from the body and continued to float forward. One could even see the hot mist coming out of the horse's nose and hear its panting. A sprinting horse had become countless pieces of meat in the midst of sprinting. This scene was extremely strange. The fallen knight on the horse had almost the same experience. His right hand left the reins. Just as he pinched the sword formula and unsheathed his flying sword, there was a deep cut on it, and it quietly broke into two. A thin red line appeared on his fingers that pinched the sword formula. His fingers were like ripe fruits, falling one after another. Then his forearm was cut into countless pieces, and then into even finer pieces of meat. His neck was cut off. His whole body was cut in the middle, and then cut into even finer pieces. Then, together with the horse that had been cut into pieces, he fell from midair. It was like a collapsing glacier. Just a moment ago, it was a master in the see-through realm and a handsome warhorse. The next moment, it became two piles of meat on the Qingling Hill. Hearing Prince Longqing's warning, ZMO, as the strongest among the fallen knights, was the first to react. He felt the strange and horrible aura in the autumn rain. He almost instinctively pulled the reins again and forcibly stopped the warhorse at the cost of suffocation. The horse let out a long and painful neigh and stood up like a human, but its body continued to move forward uncontrollably. ZMO let out a muffled groan and flew off the horse's back, falling heavily on the wet, muddy ground. Then, both of his feet stepped on the muddy ground, and he desperately retreated backwards. Looking at the autumn rain in front of him, his pale face revealed a look of horror. I slept for more than 2 hours, got up at 6:30, ate, and wrote until now. I'm so sleepy. I'll write the next chapter and try to finish it before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 529. At this moment, the group of fallen knights showed the true level of a see-through realm master, especially the absolute importance of being cold and calm in battle. These fallen knights did not know what kind of danger was hidden in the black carriage in the autumn rain. But when Longqing's warning sounded, everyone except the knight who rushed at the front made the quickest and most correct reaction, just like ZMO. They abandoned their horses and crawled on the wet ground. They grabbed the ground with their hands and kicked their legs, desperately running away from the black carriage. They seemed to be able to do anything as long as they could put some distance between themselves and the black carriage. Even so, these fallen knights did not completely avoid the damage. Several horses that were running too fast rushed into the autumn rain and were cut into pieces by the invisible force in the rain. Some of the knights' boots were shredded by invisible lines, while others had their entire calves cut off. The cut was smooth, as if there were white eyes in a red circle, which made them look even more disgusting. Miserable howls resounded in the autumn rain. Those invisible lines in the air seemed to have a mind of their own as they chased after and cut through everything. ZMO quickly retreated in the rain. He grabbed two of his slightly injured companions and threw them backwards with all his might. Just by delaying for a moment, the armor on his body had a few scratches that looked like it had been corroded. It seemed like it was about to collapse at any moment. He groaned and unsheathed his flying sword. It contained the pure chi of heaven and earth and flew in front of him. Light and shadow flashed, colliding with the invisible cutting force in the rain many times. The bright flying sword dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was very serious for a cultivator to have his natal flying sword dimmed and damaged. However, ZMO could not care so much at this time. He used the time gained by his natal sword to retreat at a high speed. He did not know how far he had retreated, but he successfully left the black carriage and the dangerous autumn rain. Then he hurriedly called his flying sword back. A fallen commander at the upper level of the see-through realm was at the rear of the Black Knights. He was not affected by the invisible cutting power in the autumn rain. He just looked at the horses that were smashed into pieces when they rushed into the autumn rain. He looked at the strange bloody lines and deep wounds on his companions' bodies. He listened to his companions' painful groans. His face became extremely ugly. He was extremely angry and unwilling. He screamed, and the flying sword came out of the scabbard. It turned into a green light with a black edge. It suddenly penetrated the layers of autumn rain and stabbed at the black carriage in the depths of the autumn rain. However, as soon as it entered the autumn rain, or more accurately, as soon as it entered the layers of autumn rain around the black carriage, the flying sword could no longer maintain its power. It instantly became dim, and a layer of rust appeared on its surface, as if it had withstood the effects of being washed by the rain for decades. Then there were many small scratches on the rusty surface of the flying sword. It looked like it was cracking. With a bang, the flying sword fell in the rain about 30 feet away from the black carriage and could no longer move. It was like a dead insect that could only be soaked in the rain until it rotted. The fallen commander's face suddenly turned pale when his natal flying sword was destroyed. He spat out a mouthful of blood. The cold rain flowed down from Zemo's hair and dripped into his eyes. He looked at the autumn rain in front of him. Even when he was expelled from the Divine Hall and his cultivation was destroyed by Yihong Yu, his eyes were still firm. Finally, fear appeared in his eyes. The autumn rain was like a cold winter. It was just an autumn rain, layers upon layers of rain, heavy rain. It fell quietly, washing away the frosty weeds, washing away the blood on the carriage and the ground. There was nothing in the rain, but it was as if there were countless of the thinnest and sharpest steel wires, silently waiting to cut apart anything that dared to enter the autumn rain, whether it was a horse, a person, or a sword. The cause of all this was not the autumn rain itself, but the quiet black carriage in the rain. Looking at the black carriage and Ning K in it, Zemo's face became paler. He felt that the black carriage and the person in it did not belong to this real world, but came from the netherworld. Seeing his most powerful and loyal subordinate seriously injured by the autumn rain, Long Qing's eyes suddenly became cold. He did not want to guess whether Ning K could still shoot the primordial 13 arrows. The psyche power in his sense of perception suddenly surged out, mobilizing the chi of heaven and earth around the temple, turning it into his own aura and directly attacking the black carriage. The aura was full of destructive energy with a sense of quietus. It seemed to have its own color, which was black. However, this seemingly powerful aura disappeared in the autumn rain around the black carriage. At least it disappeared in Long Qing's spiritual world. He lost contact with that aura, causing his sense of perception to be shaken violently. He could not help but turn pale, and his body slightly swayed. The invisible cutting power in the autumn rain could actually cut the purest aura. Long Qing suddenly thought of a certain kind of talisman in the legends, the kind of talisman that could even cut space when it was cultivated to the extreme. He could not help but change his expression slightly. Jing Fu. Long Qing looked at Ning K with his cold eyes, full of shock and faint hunger that made people's hearts palpitate. He was like a beggar who had been hungry for more than 10 days and suddenly saw a white bun in a shabby temple. He did not care whether there was blood or dust on the bun. He just wanted to eat the bun into his stomach. "You actually learned Uncle Yin," says Jing Fu. It seems that you have made great progress in the past 2 years. Jingfu was Ning Kei's most powerful talisman. When used by him, its power was even close to that of a divine talisman. However, using Jingfu was also a very heavy burden on his state. At this time, his face seemed to be even paler than Longqing's. He forced a smile and said, I don't know where you have been hiding in the past 2 years. Maybe you have been locked in the dark prison. Maybe you have encountered some adventure. Anyway, you have been away from this world for too long, so you are a little behind the times. You don't know my current legend. I can forgive your ignorance. Longqing said indifferently. However, the battle has just begun, and you have already revealed your most powerful trump card. I'm very curious about what made you make such an unwise choice. Did I give you too much pressure? I thought that disciples of the Academy were already the most narcissistic people in the world. I did not expect to see you again today. However, your question is really stupid. Even a tiger should use all its strength to fight a rabbit. Since it is a battle, of course, you should use the most powerful means from the beginning. This is the truth that even those girls who only know how to write in a daze understand. The girls in Ning Kei's words naturally referred to the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan. When they were traveling in the wilderness, he had taught her the fighting attitude of a tiger fighting a rabbit. Being ridiculed as an idiot by Ning Kei, Longqing was not angry. He looked at him and asked calmly, What should we do next? Ning Kei said, If you don't want to fight anymore, you can leave first. I have no objection. Longqing smiled and said, You must die today. Ning Kei looked at the autumn rain and said, You could try to kill me. Longqing also looked at the autumn rain and felt the looming sharp talisman intent in the rain. His smile was a little indifferent and a little cynical. Jingfu was indeed powerful and horrifying. Even he could not crack it. However, the biggest feature or weakness of talisman Taoism was that it could not maintain the power of talisman forever. As time went by, with the wind, snow, rain, dew, frost, and snow in nature, it would gradually fade until it finally disappeared. Longqing put his right hand behind his back and pointed at the cold autumn rain with his left hand. He said with a smile, When the rain stops, the talisman disappears, and the blue sky reappears. It will be the time of your death. Ning Kei did not say anything. This made Longqing feel a little dissatisfied. He seriously repeated, You can't escape today. Ning Kei said, Since I knew that the person who came was you, I never thought of escaping. Longqing was slightly stunned and asked, Why? Do you think there will be a fateful battle between us? Ning Kei said with a slight mockery, I really don't know what you saw growing up in the palace of the Yin Kingdom. How can there be so many fates in the world? The reason why I don't escape, of course, is because there is no need to escape. Don't forget, you are my defeated opponent. You have never defeated me. I see. Longqing sighed with some mixed emotions and smiled with some pain and sadness. He said, Can you still be my opponent now? As I said, I don't know what happened to you in the past 2 years and what adventures you have encountered, but it is impossible for me to be afraid of you. As long as it is you, I believe that I will not fail and I will not die. Ning Kei looked at Prince Longqing and said, Because this is my story. In my story, characters like you can only be used as a foil to me. In the carriage, Sang Sang was installing something on the remaining iron arrows in the box. Hearing Ning Kei's words, her fingers slightly stiffened and she asked, Do you really think so? The rain covered Ning Kei's slight voice. I am not youngest uncle, nor second brother. Of course I will not think so. And I think the people in this world who are most like the hero of the story do not have a good ending. Then why do you say so? Because I don't like him. So even if I can't beat him, I want to disgust him to death. Ning Kei glanced at Sang Sang and said, You know why I don't like him? Sang Sang was a little ashamed and explained, I don't like him now. And at that time, I just thought he was good-looking and wanted to look at him more. Ning Kei said coldly, At least I used to like him. Even if it was his face, it was still like. The autumn rain was cold and the talisman was fierce. The blood gradually faded and the howling became lower. The atmosphere in front of the Red Lotus Temple was still tense and even suffocating. However, at this time, Ninkei and Sang Sang were still in a mood to hide in the black horse carriage and whisper about the old scores. Long Qing was silent. At this time, Jing Fu landed in the autumn rain beside the black horse carriage. He and the fallen knights could not get close, but Ninkei could not take the opportunity to escape. No matter how powerful the talisman was, it would eventually disappear. Long Qing understood that Ninkei was trying to delay time and recover as soon as possible. So after a little thought, he sat down on the wet stone steps, closed his eyes, and began to meditate to heal his internal injuries. This was a moment of peace in the battle. This was a temporary break in the autumn rain. Continue after lunch. I started last night and slept for more than 2 hours. This is the 6th chapter. Let's see how much I can write in total. It's a pleasure of self-torture. I am S&M. Please continue to support the monthly votes. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 530. The fallen knights supported each other and retreated to a place not far away. They began to bandage their wounds and rest. The fear in their eyes when they looked at the black horse carriage gradually disappeared, replaced by vigilance and hatred. They had come from the mountain road like a thunderbolt, but they were forced to retreat before they could even touch the black horse carriage. They also paid the heavy price of the death of one of their companions and the serious injuries of several others. For them who were in the see-through state, this was an unbearable shame. The autumn rain continued. The Red Lotus Temple was covered with frost leaves, and the horse carriage was wet. Ninkei had already sat back in the carriage and covered the skylight. He looked at Long Qing through the window and suddenly asked, "Hey, how did you come back to life?" Long Qing slowly opened his eyes and looked at him. He said indifferently, "That's a long story." Ninkei looked at the autumn rain and said, "If the story is too long, I may not be able to finish it." Only when the well talisman still existed could one tell the story and listen to the story. Once the well talisman disappeared, the person who told the story and listened to the story would return to their original identity, the sworn enemy. The well talisman in the autumn rain was no longer so horrible at this moment. Instead, it brought a temporary peace or balance to the meeting place. I wore a mask, but you could recognize me at a glance and were so interested in my story. In those years, there was a legend in the cultivation world that you and I were destined to be enemies for life. It seems that it makes sense, Prince Long Qing said expressionlessly. In this case, I naturally can't allow you, Mr. 13 of the Academy, to shine in the cultivation world alone. So I came back. Ninkei said sarcastically, "Don't think that just because you have entered the knowing destiny state, you can put on a show and make me bow down to you. You know, there are not many people in the knowing destiny state in our place. They are like cabbages all over the mountains and plains." Long Qing said calmly, "I am not an ordinary knowing destiny state. I believe you should have felt it." Ninkei did feel a very strange and even a little horrible aura from Long Qing, which was much stronger than ordinary knowing destiny state cultivators. But he just smiled and said, "Not ordinary cabbages, after all, they are still cabbages." Then the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Looking at the silver mask on Long Qing's face, he frowned and asked, "What happened to you?" Long Qing began to tell the story of what had happened to him over the years. This was a very long story, but it was outlined very clearly by him in the simplest language. Just by listening to a few key words, one could feel the strangeness, cruelty, and even tragedy of this story. His voice was calm and emotionless, as if he was telling someone else's story. In fact, he did not want to tell others about this, but Ninkei had a special meaning to him, so he wanted Ninkei to know what he had lost and what he had regained before he died. This was a spiritual need. The fallen knights roughly knew what had happened to the priest, but they did not know these details. Listening to the voice coming from the autumn rain, they listened silently and attentively, occasionally moved. It's a good story, but it's a bit cliché. Ninkei's comment was cold and even harsh. Long Qing didn't care. "I don't believe in the theory of fated enemies. Of course, I also don't believe that after you've been through so much and come back to the world, You will take revenge for all the humiliation you've suffered. Ning Ke said, because the two biggest humiliation you've suffered were from me. If I let you take revenge for all these things, how can I live? Long Qing said, since it's death, why should a dead person care about how to live? Ning Ke said, I won't die. Long Qing said, I'm the person chosen by Hao Yin. I'm the one chosen by heaven. I won't die, so you must die. Ning Ke looked at his calm expression and suddenly felt a little cold. He remembered what second brother had once asked Lu Yiqing. He smiled and said, how can you prove it? There's no way to prove Hao Yin's will, and there's no need to prove it to mortals. Long Qing's answer was very boring. Ning Ke looked at him with a mocking expression. Long Qing said, I've taken the heavenly power pill. Is this proof? Is the heavenly power pill rare? Ning Ke asked. Long Qing nodded very seriously. Ning Ke looked at him and laughed, saying, I've taken it a few years ago. His smile was very mean. His voice was very cold. I can also tell you that Chun Pippi has a lot of heavenly power pills in his hands. If we want, we can eat them like fried beans. What does this prove? That we are the illegitimate children of Hao Yin? Long Qing could not help changing his expression, even though he knew that there must be something wrong with this sentence. Presently, his state of mind was calm like water and cold like ice. It was even to the extent that he was on the verge of the emotionless and senseless Grand Supreme Realm. However, after being repeatedly ridiculed and slapped in the face by Ning Ke, the irritation in his heart gradually grew stronger. Ning Ke continued, You led a group of fallen knights, and your hands are stained with blood. You were chased by the West Hill Divine Palace. Don't you think it's ridiculous to say that you are a person of heaven's mandate? It's just a mental torture. After a moment of silence, Long Qing said, Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not a person of heaven's mandate, but the son of Yama. That's why I have suffered so much in this life. But I can always see hope in the darkest time, and may eventually sink to the bottom of the endless abyss. Hearing this, Ning Ke was slightly shocked, but the smile on his face became more and more sarcastic. Your Highness, you've really been away from this world for too long. You actually don't know the most widespread rumor now. Long Qing frowned slightly and asked, What rumor? Ning Ke pointed at himself and said, Everyone thinks that I'm the son of Yama. It's said that Yama has tens of thousands of children. Of course, only one is projected into our world, which represents disaster and destruction. It's not a dazzling image. Ning Ke looked at him and said, But you even want to compete with me for such a title? Your Highness, you are too competitive and too arrogant. Moreover, your arrogance is fake because you still care about how the world looks at you. Back then, you lost to me repeatedly and suffered humiliation in the cold eyes of the world. Therefore, the reason you reappeared in the world this time is not only to kill me, but also to regain the respect of the world. If you don't get respect, you don't even hesitate to let the world fear you, because these strong emotions are the spiritual pillars that support you to live until now. In order to achieve this goal, you need a shocking background. Unfortunately, even if you can kill me, you can't surpass me in this aspect because my teacher is the headmaster of the academy. Even if you are accepted as a disciple by the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey, you are still inferior to me because your teacher will never be able to defeat my teacher. In order to restore your confidence and seriously damaged glory, in order to regain the respect of the world, you hungrily make yourself stronger and stronger. You constantly hypnotize yourself, try to make yourself believe that you're really a person of heaven's mandate. Unfortunately, Haotian Taoism's intolerance has shaken your confidence in this aspect. So you turn to the dark night, wishing that Yama could sleep with your mother. Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head, saying, You're already crazy. Long Qing said, How can a dying man be qualified to judge me? Ning Ke said, I may not be qualified, but what about the headmaster of the academy? Long Qing was silent. Ning Ke said, When you and I climbed the mountain together and participated in the examination for the second floor of the academy, what words did you see on the wooden door? Long Qing narrowed his eyes slightly. Of course, he remembered the 4 words written on the stone, but he didn't want to remember them. Ning-Ke said, "A gentleman doesn't fight." This is the headmaster of the academy's reminder or warning to you. If you always want to fight with others, how can you not lose? If you always want to fight with heaven, how can heaven tolerate you? Longqing looked into his eyes and asked, "If heaven can't tolerate you, will you fight or not?" Ning-Ke said, "I will fight when it's time to fight." Longqing said, "Then why can't I fight?" Ning-Ke said matter-of-factly, "How can you be compared with me? Don't always think about fighting with me. You can't possibly win against me. The more you fight, the worse you will lose." Longqing smiled calmly and indifferently. Just when he was about to continue to say something, Ning-Ke suddenly opened the skylight and stood up. He glanced at the rain falling from the sky and felt the gradually fading talisman intent in the rain. He said, "Don't talk so much nonsense." Longqing frowned slightly and wondered who was talking nonsense. In the carriage, Sang put the modified small iron cylinder on the remaining 5 iron arrows in the box. She silently thought that her young master was indeed the most talkative person in the world. Longqing raised his hand and pointed to the depths of the autumn rain. He said, "Your Jing Fu is still there." Ning-Ke held the iron bow with his left hand and said, "Idiot, since it's my Jing Fu, how can it work on me?" Longqing smiled and said, "Then why haven't you moved?" Ning-Ke said, "Because I need to rest, or I really can't pull the bow." Longqing asked, "Have you rested well?" Ning-Ke said, "I feel refreshed, full of energy and full of energy." Longqing said, "You don't need to talk when you rest. With the Jing Fu, you don't need to talk to stall for time. Why did you talk so much before? And it seemed to be from your heart." "Of course, those words are from my heart." Ning-Ke reached out to take the iron arrow from Sang. He looked at Longqing and said, "I'm going to kill you, and I sincerely hope that your last time in this world is also very unpleasant." Longqing's face was slightly cold. Ning-Ke pulled the bow and arrow. Without any nonsense, he shot an arrow at him. Longqing knew his shameless and cold-blooded fighting style very well. He seemed to be talking calmly, but in fact, he had been silently preparing for the next battle. The seemingly unexpected arrow had long been expected by him. He was fully prepared, and even calmer than when he took Ning-Ke's iron arrow before he was injured. He flicked his sleeves, and the chi of heaven and earth in front of the ruined temple was in chaos, and the peach blossom reappeared. The black peach blossom seemed to receive the arrow effortlessly. Longqing's figure blended into the autumn rain, and like a ghost, he swept past the arrow. Then, it was a terrifying counterattack from a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state. However, at this moment, the iron arrow that pierced the black peach blossom exploded. When I wrote the last few sentences, I suddenly thought of a chapter in The Vermilion Bird. It was many years ago. I like this kind of feeling very much. It is scattered and free. If you also like it, please continue to vote for me. I will continue to write, and I plan to finish this part of the plot. I really don't know when I will finish it. While I'm not dizzy, I should speed up and try to finish the next chapter before 4 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 531. The iron arrow exploded violently, and the black peach blossoms in the rain were blown apart. The scales on the small iron cylinder whistled and shot toward Longqing's body. Longqing screamed angrily and forced all his cultivation out of his body. In the autumn rain, the chi of heaven and earth was summoned and turned into countless transparent shields, layer by layer, in front of him. The invisible chi of heaven and earth shield was not a real metal shield, and Longqing was not a powerful cultivator at the peak of martial arts. Although the whistling metal pieces were weakened by the chi of heaven and earth shield, they still cut his black Taoist robe into pieces, and blood flowed from the tiny wounds. What was more terrifying was the flame and the scorching airwave caused by the explosion itself. At that moment, the rain in front of the Red Lotus Temple was brightly illuminated and then quickly burned into white mist, making a squeaking sound. At the moment of the explosion, Longqing changed the direction of his ghostly figure. He tiptoed on the wet ground, and with the natural flow of the chi of heaven and earth and the driving force of the airwave, He floated backward from the temple gate to the dilapidated main hall, and his body slammed into the clay statue of the Luohan. Smoke and dust filled the air, and the statue of the Luohan was broken into several pieces. A mouthful of blood spurted from his lips, and the emotions in his eyes were extremely complicated, for he could not understand many things that happened today. Talking about the heavenly mandate realm in Yama with Ning Ke was actually a way for him to buy time. However, he clearly saw the black rain fall on Ning Ke's body. But why was Ning Ke still as usual after such a long time? There was no sign of poisoning at all. What was most incomprehensible was that the second floor of the academy developed a weapon like the primordial 13 arrows, which could help Ning Ke fight against the knowing destiny state. It was already unimaginable, but now the academy could add that little explosive thing to the primordial 13 arrows. Was the academy going to go against heaven? Long Qing supported the broken statue of the Luohan and stood up with difficulty. He looked at the looming black horse carriage outside the temple with hatred and let out a very cold scream. However, the next moment, his scream suddenly stopped, because the second iron arrow had arrived. Then there was another explosion. Then came the third arrow and the fourth arrow. Explosions occurred one after another. The walls and beams of the temple collapsed, and the statues of the Arhats turned into powder. The flames ignited the dirty yellow curtains and the fallen wooden beams. Suddenly, the fire rose to the sky. The entire Red Lotus Temple was ablaze, illuminating the somewhat gloomy world in the autumn rain. A pained howl like that of a wild beast suddenly resounded out from within the burning temple. The howl was filled with rage, ruthlessness, resentment, slaughter, and various other negative emotions, and it caused others to have the urge to cover their ears. Sparks flew and were extinguished by the autumn rain. Long Qing walked out. His body was charred all over, and he looked extremely miserable. The blood that flowed out of his wounds was evaporated by the scorching heat waves, giving off a foul stench. The silver mask on his face had disappeared, revealing half of his face that was originally covered. That half of her face was red and swollen like a peach. It was not an old wound, but a new one. Long Qing's natal black peach blossom protected his body. At the most dangerous moment, he released a domineering aura and isolated the real fire outside his body. However, he could not isolate the heat and the transfer of temperature. Silver is one of the most conductive metals. Therefore, the half of his face under the silver mask was burned the most severely. This was not the heaviest injury on his body, but it was the most horrifying injury. A few years ago, he was shot by Ning Ke on the snow cliff of the wilderness with an arrow. After that, he was like a walking corpse, a beggar, and acted in second-rate romantic dramas. He suffered all kinds of disdain and torture from the world. However, Long Qing's handsome face was still unharmed. Only a few more scars did not damage his beauty, but added to his charm. Now that he had finally regained great power, he did not expect to suffer such a heavy blow soon after he stepped into the world again. His face was finally ruined. It was the whimsical idea of the disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy to turn the primordial 13 arrows into exploding primordial 13 arrows. It had just been developed by Sixth Brother not long ago, so Ning Ke did not bring many with him. Therefore, he decided to save these 5 arrows for the most appropriate time. In the beginning, he thought that even if he could not kill Long Qing with 7 iron arrows, he could at least seriously injure him. However, he did not expect that Long Qing was still alive when the arrow box was empty and there was only 1 iron arrow on the string. What chilled Ning Ke even more was that he had thought that Long Qing, whose face had been destroyed, would be furious and unable to keep his cool. However, when Long Qing walked out of the burning Red Lotus Temple, his eyes were still so indifferent, as if he did not care about the horrible burns on his face that were as beautiful as peach blossoms. This person was indeed not an ordinary knowing destiny powerhouse. In terms of strength, he was almost as powerful as Xiaohe, who had been hurt by Tang. In terms of will, he was even more terrifying. Looking at Long Qing, who was like coal in the rain with smoke rising from his body, but his expression was as cold as ice. Ning Ke felt a little bitter. He thought to himself, "Are you really the son of Yama?" Ning Ke vaguely saw the shadow of Yama. He was not sure if he saw it on Long Qing, but he was very sure that the shadow had fallen on the burning temple. It represented death and despair. But Ning Ke was a person who would never despair before he was sure of his own death. He looked at Long Qing and said, "Your story is very tragic, and your current image is also tragic. But all of this is meaningless, because you are destined to lose to me and then lose to me again and again. Even if you're lucky to survive today, you will still lose to me in the future, because this is destined by Hao Yan. So the more tragic your story is, the more tragic your image is, and the more ridiculous you will be in the legends of the cultivation world in the future. You always like to talk so much when you're not confident or not ready." Long Qing's expression was very calm, and so was his voice. He said, "But as you said, tragic and any means are meaningless at this moment. You will die today." The autumn rain continued to wash, and the talisman of Jing Fu gradually faded and finally disappeared without a trace. The fallen knights waited in silence outside for a long time. When the talisman of Jing Fu disappeared, without any orders, some rode on uninjured horses, and some silently moved forward to attack the black horse carriage. These fallen knights used to be powerhouses in the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Even those former squires had the cultivation of the see-through state after taking the earth-sitting elixir. The 5 cavalry commanders had all reached the upper see-through state, and each of them could fight with Ning Ke for several rounds. As for the most powerful commander, Zimo, he was already at the peak of the see-through state. His real state was similar to Ning Ke's, and he was also a powerhouse who was only one step away from the knowing destiny state. Such a group of powerhouses was enough to sweep away those inconspicuous small countries. In fact, the headquarters of the Taoist Master Taoism in Dragon Tiger Mountain and many altars of the martial arts sect were also massacred by these fallen knights. On the other side of the black horse carriage, in front of the burning Red Lotus Temple, Long Qing once again summoned his natal black peach blossom. One of the petals on it was almost withered, as if it would fall at any time. But what he summoned was not the peach blossom, but the sword in the peach blossom. A pure black invisible Taoist sword slowly emerged from the black peach blossom. Ning Ke suddenly shook his head. He turned around and ignored Prince Long Qing behind him. Instead, he aimed the iron arrow at the fallen knights. The higher a cultivator's state was, the more sensitive he was to danger. Zmo was the most powerful among the fallen knights, so his senses were the sharpest. We found that Ning Ke was aiming at him. He did not hesitate to fall forward into the grass. He used to be the commander of the cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace and was a professional soldier. He knew that if he wanted to save his own life on the battlefield, then he should not cherish anything like elegance. Ning Ke did not intend to shoot him, because he knew that this fallen commander at the peak of the see-through state was very powerful, and he might not be killed by an arrow. He shot the last iron arrow in his hand at the other fallen commander who was approaching on horseback. It was a loud bang. That upper-level grotto, profound realm, depraved commander simply did not have any chance to dodge. The upper half of his body was blasted into pieces by this iron arrow. After a moment, flesh mixed with blood sprinkled onto the ground from the sky like rain. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The pieces of the corpses fell into the rain-soaked grass, splashing blood. Some of them fell beside the fallen knights and even brushed past their faces. Although they knew that those warm pieces of flesh were their companions who had gone through life and death together, the fallen knights did not show any emotion on their faces. They just silently and attentively looked at the black horse carriage. Seeing this, Ning Ke once again confirmed that these masters in black Taoist robes were cultivators who really knew how to kill. They were worthy of respect and even awe. On the battlefield, the best way to show respect to one's opponent was to kill him. When Ning Ke rarely decided to respect someone, it often meant that the most thorough and bloody battle was about to begin, just like every battle in the past years. Sang Sang habitually held the big black umbrella and was ready to stand beside Ning Quebec. However, she suddenly felt that the cold aura in her body had become a little strange. She coughed twice sadly. Ning Ke pushed her back to the soft couch in the carriage and jumped onto the carriage. He closed the skylight with his foot and looked at the fallen knights not far away. He gently waved his knife. His first knife chopped at the shaft of the carriage and cut the reins tied to the big black horse. Although the big black horse had the ability to break the reins on its own, Ning Ke knew that this silly thing seemed to be shameless, but it was actually very loyal. If he did not cut the reins, then it might really foolishly stay and die with him and Sang Sang. Ning Ke cut the reins and set the big black horse free. This also meant that he did not have much hope of leaving alive today. A flying sword pierced through the air with a shrill sound. Ning Ke turned his wrist and chopped at the air with his padao. It seemed to be a casual cut, but it was unimaginably precise. The thick and solid blade directly shook the flying sword away. It was like a scavenger who saw something useless in a garbage dump and casually picked it up with a stick and threw it into the sewer. I can't hold on any longer. I have to hold on a little longer. I don't know when the next chapter will come out. I don't know if I have time to send out the leaflet for canvassing for votes. Anyway, I want it first. Everyone has a monthly ticket. Vote for me quickly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.